Hello, and welcome to this clean historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest, A Heart Filled with Hope, by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1, Rocky River, Wyoming, 1881. Andrew Sanford should have been feeling happy. He had all his family gathered around him, but he couldn't help feeling like something was missing. "Here's to Ma making a full recovery," his brother said jovially, raising his glass of water. "There was no need for you to turn this into a celebration about me," Maud Sanford said from where she was sitting at the end of the table. Her eyes twinkled despite her words. She loved nothing more than having everyone over for lunch together after church on a Sunday. "It's not every day our Ma gets over a nasty bout of influenza," Andrew said. He raised his glass of water as well and took a sip. "You had us worried there for a while, Ma." His sister, Julia, stood up and started to clear the table. And he smiled as all his young nephews and nieces scampered away to play with the wooden toys in the box in the corner of the room. They were a lively bunch, but he loved them dearly. His 3 brothers were already happily married and lived in their own log cabins, which they had all built together on the ranch. And with every year that passed, the family was growing as they welcomed new children into the Sanford clan. He sighed as he wondered whether he would be lucky enough to have a wife of his own one day. "I'm going outside to check that mare," he said. He suddenly found he was feeling envious of his brothers, and it was not an emotion he was comfortable with. "She's looking like she might foal any day," he added before slipping away. The mare was grazing happily in the paddock, still looking no closer to having her foal, but Andrew was grateful for a few minutes alone with his thoughts. He leaned on the top rail of the corral and surveyed the land around him. Every fence, crop, and animal was there as a result of their hard work. But lately, he had been thinking that perhaps he had spent too long only thinking about improving the ranch at the expense of settling down and starting a family. "What's on your mind?" Julia said behind him. She clambered up the railings and perched on top, looking down at him with a quizzical expression. "You've seemed kind of distracted for the last few days. Is something troubling you?" "It's nothing to worry about. Just something that Henry said the other day, is all." "Uh-huh." Julia gave him a shrewd look, not ready to let him get off so easily. "I saw the 2 of you chatting for a while when he visited. Did it happen to be about how happy he is now that he's gotten himself a lovely wife?" Andrew shrugged, but felt the heat rise to his cheeks. His sister knew him too well, and she was correct. Their neighbor Henry had been eagerly explaining the delights of how happy he was now that he was married and how his wife had come out west as a mail-order bride. "I guess that was part of the conversation," he admitted grudgingly. "Are you figuring it's time for you to take a wife as well?" Julia asked lightly. "You can't bury yourself in work all the time." "I'm not burying myself in work, but I don't have time to go courting a young woman in town, do I? Not when there's so much happening on the ranch that needs my attention." Andrew knew that his words sounded defensive, but he also had a point. He was a busy man, and work had always come first for him. "Henry spoke with me about it as well when I saw him in town recently," Julia said. "He said that finding a bride with the help of Mrs. Devereaux's matrimonial agency fitted perfectly with his obligations on his ranch." "Being too busy is no excuse, Andrew. Why don't you think about doing the same as Henry?" Andrew bent down to pull up a weed that had caught his eye. "I guess I could think about it," he muttered after a long pause. "How about visiting Mrs. Devereaux tomorrow when you go into town?" "Tomorrow? No, I'm too busy. I'll go in next week." He was starting to regret mentioning any of it to Julia because he knew she would press him on the matter. A shout from the log cabin provided a welcome distraction. "Are you all coming back for coffee?" Maud called from the veranda. Julia jumped down off the fence and squeezed Andrew's arm before hurrying back toward the cabin. "You know it's the right thing to do," she said with a grin, looking back at him over her shoulder. Andrew nodded and followed her slowly, deep in thought. He hadn't wanted to mention it to his family, but Henry's suggestion to place an advertisement for a mail-order bride had piqued his curiosity. For the first time in months, his spirits lifted at the idea of having a kind-hearted wife to come home to at the end of each day. Perhaps he would visit the matrimonial agency next time he was in town, just to find out what it was all about. Chapter 2. New York, 1880. Adeline Webb hummed cheerfully as she bustled toward the drawing room to lay the fire for Mrs. Jephson, her new mistress. As the door swung open into the opulent room, she paused for a moment, still barely able to believe that she, humble Addie from St. Stephen's Orphanage on Rengate Street, was now working for one of New York's wealthiest families. Mind your manners, and be sure to remember that you're showing everyone what a good upbringing at St. Stephen's can do for a child. Addie smiled as she recalled Sister Mary's parting words when she had departed the institution the previous spring. She might have been wearing a threadbare gray dress that was a little on the short side at her ankles, and perhaps her nerves had shown as she tried to tuck her errant curls back into the bun at the nape of her neck. But clearly, Mr. Jephson had been willing to overlook those small points as he'd strolled along the line of young ladies to choose a new housemaid to come and work at his home, Warburgley Mansion. He had examined her hands, looked her up and down, and then given Sister Mary a decisive nod. "I can tell she's not afraid of hard work. She'll do just fine. He only picked you because you're well built." One of the other girls had grumbled sourly as Addie excitedly packed her few belongings into an old carpet bag matron had given her for the momentous occasion. Addie had just shrugged. After years of always being the tallest girl for her age and stooping because of feeling self-conscious about her womanly figure, which had appeared earlier than most, it seemed that how she looked didn't matter after all. As she had tied a tattered straw bonnet over her dark hair, she hadn't noticed the creamy complexion and wide blue eyes framed by long dark lashes that others saw, just the mixture of nerves and excitement that tracked across her face. And here she was, almost a year later, 19 years old, and sweeping out the fire under the stern gaze of Mr. Jephson's ancestors captured in the gilt-framed paintings that hung dotted around the house. It was as if she'd been here all her life. The work was demanding, of course, but she was used to it from being at St. Stephen's. She got up before dawn to sweep out the fires and lay new ones, so the rooms would be warm by the time Mr. Jephson and his children rose. And this was followed by hours of scrubbing, sweeping, and polishing. If it meant that her hands were red and chapped during the winter months, she didn't mind in the slightest. Sister Mary had been a great advocate of hard work being its own reward. And occasionally, Addie even had a few minutes spare to peek into the leather-bound books, which were crammed into the many bookcases in the house. The orphanage had given her a good upbringing. She could now see with hindsight. She had never gone hungry, and although they all had chores to do in the laundry and kitchens, they received a surprisingly thorough education. Addie loved nothing more than escaping into one of the books in the orphanage's modest library after they had attended church on Sundays or doing her needlework sampler. The only thing she regretted was never having a family to call her own. If anything, she was more acutely aware of this gaping hole in her life now that she was working for Mr. Jephson. At the orphanage, they had all been in the same situation. But here, she couldn't help but feel a wave of envy toward the household staff who visited their families on a Sunday afternoon. Even those who lived too far away would eagerly await letters with news from home. She had neither. But she never let it show on her face when the younger maids, who had never done much book learning, came to her so she could read out their letters to them and gently encourage them to learn a few words as her finger tracked over the paper. "A kind-hearted girl like you will have a family of your own one day, for sure." Sister Mary had told her one day, when she'd found Addie crying as she scrubbed the floor of St. Stephen's dining room one Christmas Eve. Addie jumped as the deep chimes of the grandfather clock in the hallway pulled her out of her memories of the past. "No time for daydreaming," she muttered, scurrying over to the hearth. She worked quickly, scooping the ash into a bucket and then laying fresh kindling onto the remaining embers. A few firm pumps of the bellows had the flames licking up the chimney again in no time, and her cheeks were rosy from the heat. "Now to do the polishing and then breakfast," Addie said to herself. She put the ash bucket near the door and pulled a duster from her apron pocket. She had buffed the elegant mahogany furniture with lavender beeswax polish the day before, so today she only had to carefully dust around the many ornaments and resist the urge to indulge her favorite pastime of pausing to admire each one. Mr. Jephson's first wife had a passion for china figurines, and they adorned almost every surface. The housekeeper, Mrs. Alsop, had told her in reverent tones that they came from as far away as Paris, and woe betide anyone who broke one. "The master can't bring himself to pack them away since his wife died, Lord rest her soul," she had explained when Addie had first arrived. The household had still been in mourning, and it had taken her weeks to pluck up the courage to dust the ornaments properly in case she clumsily dropped one. Now she spoke to them like old friends. "Good day to you," Addie said quietly as she swished her duster around 3 porcelain figurines of ladies in ruffled gowns. They looked as though they were about to do the waltz, and she held the side of her gray linsey-woolsey dress to mimic their elegant posture, twirling on the Persian rug in front of the fire to the imaginary strains of the orchestra. "Miss Webb, what are you doing?" The crisp tones of Catherine Jephson, Mr. Jephson's second wife, brought Addie to a stumbling halt. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I must have gotten carried away when I was dusting the figurines." Addie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She darted a glance at the gold carriage clock on the mantel. It was not yet 7 o'clock in the morning. Usually, Mr. Jephson and the children never rose before 8. Catherine Jephson sighed and drifted toward the armchair next to the fire, sinking into it wearily. It gave Addie a chance to surreptitiously admire her silk day gown and the way the ruby rings on her slender hands winked in the lamplight. "I wasn't expecting you in here so early, ma'am," Addie said hesitantly. "Would you like me to fetch you a cup of tea? Is the fire warm enough for you?" The new lady of the house regarded Addie coolly. She was only a few years older than her, but she had a poise and confidence which came from a lifetime of knowing she would marry a wealthy man and be part of the highest echelons of New York society. "I'm not sure I could stomach a cup of tea, and the fire is perfectly warm, thank you." "I'll collect my things and be on my way then, ma'am." Catherine had only moved into the grand house a few months earlier after her lavish wedding to Mr. Jephson, and Addie still felt nervous in her presence. "It's fine, don't mind me. I couldn't sleep. Do you like working here, Miss Webb?" Mrs. Jephson seemed inclined to talk as Addie quickly finished dusting the escritoire in the corner of the room. "Oh, yes, ma'am," Addie replied truthfully. "I've never seen such a wonderful house in my whole life. It's a pleasure to work here. I saw a picture of a room like this in a book at the orphanage once, with wonderful paintings on the walls and books to read, and to think I can see it for real now." She stopped abruptly. Sister Mary had often remarked that she could be a chatterbox at the slightest encouragement. "I suppose it is a fine house," Mrs. Jephson agreed. "I don't care for the china figurines, but Harold insists they must stay out on show," she added, looking suddenly forlorn. Addie wasn't sure what to say, but her heart went out to her. She had never been in love, but she figured it must be hard to be constantly reminded of the lady of the house who had come before her. Mr. Jephson was much older than his second wife, and the gossip below stairs was that he had remarried in haste so that his children, 6-year-old Georgina and 4-year-old Elliot, wouldn't be without a mother for too long. "Are you sure I can't fetch you something to drink?" Addie said, edging toward the door. "Perhaps Cook could make you a hot chocolate, ma'am? Mrs. Alsop swears by a hot, milky drink to help her get to sleep at night." Mrs. Jephson sighed again, lost in her thoughts. "I noticed that you seem to do well with Georgina and Elliot when they're playing up," she said eventually, giving Addie a curious look. "They seem to respond to you better than Miss Macklin, even though she is supposedly their nanny. Do you enjoy being with the children?" Her tone implied that it was an unusual trait to have. "I really do, ma'am. I suppose it's because they always wanted us older girls to look after the younger children in the orphanage. God bless them. Some of them used to cry themselves to sleep, night after night. But I found with a bit of love and attention, they soon settled in. Love and attention? I see, said Mrs. Jephson. A thoughtful look came over her face. I didn't mean to interfere with Miss Macklin's duties, Addie said hastily. The nanny who Mr. Jephson had hired not long after Addie had arrived to care for his children was sharp-tongued and had little patience for her charges, much to Addie's dismay. I expect you're asking if I like children because of the incident in the hall, ma'am? A few days earlier, Rhoda Macklin had stormed back into the house, declaring that Georgina and Elliot were impossibly rude and obstinate after an exhausting outing to the park, and Addie had rushed forward to protect them from her tirade. Mrs. Jephson had walked past just as both children were clinging to Addie's skirts like limpets, and Rhoda was trying to prise them off to be punished. I couldn't help myself, but I won't do it again. She picked up the ash bucket and opened the door again. No, wait a moment. Mrs. Jephson called her back. Between you and me, Miss Webb, I can see that the children aren't flourishing under Miss Macklin's care. She stood up and paced in front of the fire. Harold hoped that the children would regard me as their mama, but I'm at a loss as to how to persuade them. Elliot cries day and night, and Georgina always seems rather surly when she's with me. I don't think Harold chose wisely when he employed Miss Macklin either. Even I can see that they don't warm to her. Maybe they just need a little longer, ma'am. I'm sure they will grow to like you very much, Addie murmured tactfully. Mrs. Jephson gave her a rueful smile. You flatter me, Miss Webb. The thing is, she glanced at the doorway, making sure they were alone. I'm with child, and I really don't think I could cope with Georgina and Elliot as well as my own baby, and I don't have much confidence in Miss Macklin's skills to cope either. I would be happy to help in any way you might want me to. Addie wasn't sure whether she was speaking out of turn, but Mrs. Jephson sounded desperate. Would you? Catherine's face lit up with a radiant smile that made Addie understand why Mr. Jephson had fallen in love with her, in spite of the society gossips saying she was far too young for him. She was a beautiful woman. I wouldn't want to interfere with Miss Macklin, though, ma'am, Addie said hastily. She's very particular about how she likes things to be done with the children. Don't worry about that, Mrs. Jephson said with an airy wave of her hand. She lowered her voice. I had the coachman take me to St. Stephen's a few days ago, and I spoke with Sister Mary and Matron. They both told me that despite your tender years, you were always excellent with the younger children. Addie blushed at the thought of the glowing words, but also felt awkward that Mrs. Jephson had been making inquiries about her. But I'm just a housemaid, ma'am. I expect Miss Macklin is better qualified than me, despite what Sister Mary said. I'm nothing special, and I've never had any proper education about looking after little ones. I just wanted to help the children settle in, ma'am, what with having no family of their own. My mind is made up, Adeline, Mrs. Jephson said firmly. I saw with my own eyes how Georgina and Elliot preferred being with you. My husband was quite clear that caring for the children was to be my domain, and I could get whatever help I wanted. I would like to promote you to be their nanny. But what about Miss Macklin? Addie gasped. Let me worry about that. From now on, you will sleep in the nursery with Georgina and Elliot, take your meals with them, and you may also start teaching them to read and write. Sister Mary assured me that you had a decent education. In return, you will have Sunday afternoons off and an increase in your wages. Mrs. Jephson sounded breathless with relief as she rattled off the terms of Addie's new position. I don't know what to say. Addie looked nervously over her shoulder, hoping that Rhoda Macklin wasn't nearby. I'll tell the other servants that you're starting today. What about my other duties, ma'am? I was meant to start spring cleaning the grand staircase today, and the silver needs doing too. Mrs. Jephson bit her lip. I'll speak with Mrs. Alsop. Perhaps Miss Macklin could take up your housemaid duties until she finds a new employer? Addie's heart sank. Rhoda Macklin had a spiteful streak, and she knew this news would not go down well. She only hoped that Mrs. Jephson would write her a glowing reference that would help her find a new position as a nanny elsewhere very soon. Otherwise, she knew Rhoda would do her utmost to make her life a misery. Chapter 3. New York, 1881. Now then, children, we'll do some reading for a short while, and then we can go outside for a walk to the park, as it's such a lovely spring day. Addie waited patiently while Georgina and Elliot settled down at their wooden desks and were soon engrossed in looking at their books. She strolled to the window and looked outside into the large garden behind the mansion. The gardeners were hard at work, and Rhoda was pegging out the washing near the back of the servants' quarters. Rhoda glanced up toward the nursery window. Even from this distance, Addie could sense her hostility by the pinch of her mouth in her narrow face and the way she snatched up the next sheet resentfully. A year had passed since Mrs. Jephson's announcement about Addie taking Rhoda's place as nanny to the children. And Addie could still clearly remember the venom in Rhoda's voice as she had waylaid her on the way to the nursery later that day. "I've seen the way you've wormed your way into the place that's rightfully mine," she had muttered, looking along the corridor to make sure she wouldn't be overheard. "You'll regret this, Adeline Webb. I'll make sure of it if it's the last thing I do." "I didn't do it on purpose," Addie had retorted. "It seems to me you don't even like the children anyway, and I'm sure Mrs. Jephson will help you find another nanny position." "You're welcome to them," Rhoda had shot back, her pale gray eyes snapping with anger. "But who's going to want to employ me as a nanny, knowing that Mrs. High and Mighty Jephson didn't find me suitable? You know nobody in New York will touch me now, which means I'll have to do this wretched housemaid job until I can figure out something better." Addie was surprised that Rhoda was still in service in the Jephson household. She was always quick to criticize her employers to the other servants and was not well liked, but rumor had it that she liked to collect secrets to hold over people, which probably explained why she hadn't been sacked. "Is it time to go out to play yet, Miss Webb?" Georgina closed her book and looked at her hopefully. "Do you think Papa and Mama will want to see us later? Maybe I could pick them some flowers." Addie's heart squeezed with sympathy for the little girl. It was ironic that Georgina and Elliot had been born to such a wealthy family, yet in many respects were treated almost like orphans, the same as Addie had been. Mr. Jephson showed little interest in his children, and Catherine Jephson was struggling to adapt to having her own baby a few months earlier, preferring to let the nursery maid take care of him. She had to admit that the children had been a handful when she'd become their nanny, but she quickly realized it was only because they craved attention from their papa and felt that Catherine was trying to take the place of their beloved mama after she died. "I think a few flowers would be a wonderful idea, Georgina." "What about me? What can I give them?" Elliot asked, looking anxious at the thought of his sister being preferred over him. "You did a lovely drawing this morning. In fact, both of you did," Addie said hastily. "Your papa might like to have it in his study." Elliot and Georgina beamed at each other, happy now that they had a plan to please their parents. They were in high spirits as Addie fetched their coats from the enormous dressing room which held all their clothes. They had more toys and books than she had ever seen for two children, and clothes from the finest dressmakers in New York, yet not the love from their parents that they longed for. "At least I can make up for that in some small way." The thought helped her put Rhoda's frequent icy looks to the back of her mind. She often prayed that they might be able to put their differences behind them, but deep in her heart she knew that Rhoda still hadn't forgiven her. The children skipped down the stairs ahead of her, and Addie felt her spirits lift. It was a beautiful early spring day, and an outing to the park at the end of the street would do the children good after being cooped up in the nursery for the last week because of endless bad weather. They would be able to run around to their heart's content without worrying about being too noisy. "Addie, Cook wants to see you." Miranda, one of the other maids and Addie's best friend, hurried toward her. "You look flustered," Addie remarked with a smile. Miranda's mob cap was askew on her curls, and she sounded breathless. "Mr. Jephson's brother is visiting and staying for a few days, but you'd think it was Queen Victoria herself by the amount of fuss being made to prepare his room." She lowered her voice slightly. "You'd better watch out with him around. He has a certain reputation with the maids, if you know what I mean." Addie nodded. Frederick Jephson had been abroad for the last 2 years. But she had heard plenty of rumors about a previous maid who'd had to leave under a cloud of shame because he'd had his wicked way with her and gotten her in the family way. "I can take care of myself. Don't worry about that," she whispered. "Wait here for me, children. I just need to speak with Cook for a moment." Addie pointed toward one of the many bookcases. "Choose a book to look at. I won't be long." She strode to the kitchen, hoping that the children wouldn't get too boisterous in her absence. They were already overexcited at the thought of going for a walk. As Addie returned to the entrance hall 10 minutes later, her hands went clammy with worry as she saw the children had vanished. "Georgina? Elliot? Where are you?" She hurried along the corridor toward the drawing room, remembering that they had been asking to go in there the day before to look at their mama's china figurines. "Get out, you two. You know very well you're not allowed in here." Rhoda's indignant tones drifted toward Addie, and she broke into a run. She burst into the drawing room just in time to see Rhoda scrambling to her feet from where she had been scooping out the ash from the grate. "How can I do my work with you two sniveling creatures getting in my way?" Rhoda grabbed her feather duster and swiped it in the children's direction, not realizing that Addie was watching. "Rhoda, don't be so mean," Addie cried, making the housemaid spin around so angrily that her feather duster caught one of the figurines, sending it crashing to the floor, where it smashed into smithereens. Addie recoiled at the hatred in Rhoda's eyes, and the children scurried out of the room, looking frightened. "What is the meaning of this?" Mr. Jephson's booming voice came from the doorway. "I was trying to work in my study, and all I could hear was the children misbehaving." His gaze fell on the shards of porcelain all over the floor, and he scowled. "Did the children do this?" he demanded. "No, sir," Addie cried, knowing that his wrath would be terrifying. "It was her, sir. She did it, waltzing in here as careless as you like while I was trying my best to clean the fire out, sir." Rhoda's eyes filled with tears, and she pouted prettily, looking up at Mr. Jephson. "I can't believe Miss Webb would be so cruel as to smash one of your dear late wife's ornaments, sir. It's fairly broken my heart." "But that's not true, and you know it," Addie exclaimed. "Why would Miss Macklin lie about such a thing?" Mr. Jephson said icily. "You left the children unattended, and now you've broken one of my most treasured possessions. I won't warn you again, Miss Webb. If you do one more thing to displease me, I shall see to it that you're sent packing without a letter of recommendation." Addie gasped at the injustice of Rhoda's false accusation, but knew it would be pointless to try and argue her case. Mr. Jephson had made his mind up, and Rhoda shot her a look of triumph from behind his back. "Yes, sir, I understand." Addie bobbed her head and went out to collect the children, while Mr. Jephson comforted Rhoda, who was still dabbing the edge of her apron under her eyes to mop up the tears she seemed to be able to summon at will. "Is Papa angry with us?" Georgina asked, her eyes clouded with alarm. "We didn't mean to annoy Miss Macklin." Elliot slipped his hand into hers and sucked the thumb of his other hand at the same time. It was a sure sign he was anxious about displeasing his papa. "Nobody is angry with you," Addie said softly. She gave her charges a reassuring smile. "Let's go and enjoy the park, shall we? And you have Frederick's visit later today to look forward to." The children clung to her and skipped down the steps by her side, already looking happier. But Addie couldn't help but feel a shiver of worry as they left the house. Rhoda was determined to undermine her, she now realized, and Mr. Jephson had well and truly been taken in by Rhoda's scheming ways. "How long will you be staying with us, Frederick?" Mrs. Jephson asked over dinner that night. Addie could tell that Mrs. Jephson was hoping that it wouldn't be too long, although her expression was attentively curious as she looked at her husband's younger brother, who was almost the same age as her. "I haven't decided yet," Frederick said casually. He glanced toward Addie, who was hovering just inside the doorway of the dining room with Georgina and Elliot, standing politely by her side. "I see you have a new nanny taking care of the children, Catherine," he said. His gaze lingered on Addie, making her feel uncomfortable. "You know you're welcome to stay as long as you like," Mr. Jephson said jovially. "You've been away for too long, so it's time you stopped in one place for a few weeks, and Catherine and I are delighted to have you here." Rhoda slipped into the room, carrying a tray with a pot of tea and some of Cook's fruitcake on it. Her thin cheeks flushed pink as she caught sight of Frederick, and Addie realized that she was rather taken with his dashing good looks. "A cup of tea and some cake for you? Cook said it's your favorite, sir," she said, giving Frederick a coy smile. Frederick barely acknowledged her, other than the briefest of glances. "I'd rather have a glass of port if Henry can spare it," he said to Rhoda in an offhand manner. "So, how are you enjoying life at Warburgley Mansion?" he asked, looking directly at Addie. "It seems a shame to have someone as pretty as you hidden away in the nursery with the children," he added mischievously. The teacups rattled as Rhoda shot Addie a venomous look. "I like working here very much, sir," Addie said meekly. She had no desire to be the focus of everyone's attention and tried to encourage the children forward. "Georgina and Elliot are coming along nicely with their book learning and are very pleased to see you." She nudged the children, and they both nodded enthusiastically. "We've been working hard and drew you these pictures, Papa," they chorused, taking 2 colorfully decorated pieces of paper to Mr. Jephson. He accepted them with a slight grimace, glancing at them briefly before putting them face down on the table, not noticing how crestfallen Georgina looked. "Delightful, I'm sure. I think that's more than enough excitement for one night, children. Take them back to the nursery, Miss Webb," he added dismissively. Addie was relieved to return to the nursery with the children. There was something about the way Frederick looked at her hungrily that made her more than happy to avoid being in his company. The rumors about his philandering ways with some of the other maids on his previous visits were clearly true, and he seemed like the sort of man who thought he could behave however he wanted without any interest in the consequences. What was more worrying was the fact that he had been so offhand toward Rhoda. Addie knew jealousy when she saw it, and Rhoda would take it as a personal slight that Frederick had favored Addie, even though his attention was the last thing she wanted. Bedtime for Georgina and Elliot passed quietly. Addie read them a story and tucked them into their separate beds, pulling the silk coverlets under their chins. "Good night, sweet little ones," she whispered as their eyelids grew heavy. They looked so young and innocent as they drifted off to sleep, and she hoped that one day Mr. and Mrs. Jephson would realize that all they really wanted was more love and attention instead of the extravagant toys and clothes that filled the nursery. The ticking of the clock in the corner of the nursery usually made Addie feel sleepy, but her mind was still racing over the incident with the smashed figurine as she folded their clothes and tidied up. "Perhaps I should have explained to Mrs. Jephson that I didn't break it," she thought to herself. The mistress of the house might have been more sympathetic, but she didn't want to get Rhoda into trouble either, despite her vindictive ways. It seemed so unfair, but she knew from bitter experience that her upbringing as an orphan made people less likely to believe her, as though the painful lack of a family of her own was some sort of character failing or her own fault. She had gotten used to it over the years, but sometimes she longed to be able to confide in a mother. She yawned and stretched as she heard the clock strike 10 downstairs. She didn't feel ready for sleep, and sitting down to do some mending on her clothes left too much time for her thoughts to return to Rhoda's vendetta. She decided to go to the kitchen and make herself a cup of milky hot chocolate to see if it would help her sleep. When she reached the kitchen, everything was in darkness. The scullery maid had already tiptoed off to bed, leaving the kitchen spotless with the damp tea towels hanging on the drying rack over the range. Addie warmed some milk on top of the range and stirred it, adding a spoonful of sugar for good measure, before returning to the back stairs, which would take her up to the nursery with no danger of bumping into any of the family. She was deep in her own thoughts as she carefully carried her drink up the narrow, creaking steps, and it was only at the last minute that she realized someone was blocking her way. "I thought I might find you here," Frederick said, stepping into her path from an alcove so that she could not pass. "You hurried away, leaving me to a very dull evening with my brother and his wife. I was hoping you would come back down again." "Excuse me, sir, I need to get back to the nursery to check that the children are asleep," Addie replied. By the weak light of his lamp, His features looked wolfish as he grinned down at her. Rhoda might have found him good-looking, but she thought his dark eyes were cold and cruel. "Why, of course, Miss Webb. I certainly wouldn't want to keep you from your duties," he said softly. Addie's heart thumped painfully in her chest as she pushed past him and hurried back toward the nursery. Dark shadows loomed in every corner, making her feel jumpy, and she hoped he wouldn't be staying with them for long. Before she could reach the nursery, she became aware of footsteps behind her again. It was Frederick, and he was following her. "What do you want?" She was vaguely aware of the sound of another door opening on the landing, but thought nothing of it. "Why are you being so rude?" Frederick asked. He grinned again. "Harold tells me that you broke one of his beloved figurines earlier today. Such behavior shouldn't go unpunished, Miss Webb. Perhaps if you were to kiss me, I might put in a good word for you to stop my brother from making such a fuss about nothing." Addie backed away from him, feeling her way along the wall for the nursery door. "Please leave me alone, sir," she pleaded. "I must check on the children. I think one of them might be crying." Now, Adeline, you wouldn't deny me, would you?" Frederick came closer and took the drink from her hand, placing it on the sideboard. "I really must go, sir." Frederick pounced like a cat on a mouse, putting his hand on her shoulder with a firm grip. His broad shoulders blocked her view, and he smiled lazily. "You're just a servant, Miss Webb. I suggest you do exactly as I say, or else." Addie stood taller, almost looking him in the eye, and took a deep breath before letting out a deafening scream. Chapter 4. New York, 1881. As Addie's scream echoed along the top landing, doors flew open in every direction. Frederick scowled and pushed himself away from her, sauntering nonchalantly to the sideboard, where he picked up the hot drink and took a sip. "What's happening? Is it a burglary? Is somebody ill?" Mrs. Alsop, the housekeeper, demanded. Her nightcap was tilted to one side of her head, and her jowls wobbled with distress. Addie took a breath, ready to tell everyone exactly what Frederick had been up to. But to her shock, Rhoda pushed her way through the other servants who were standing and staring at her. "I saw everything," she cried. "This wretched young woman has behaved most inappropriately," Frederick said, looking bemused. "I expect she's going to claim that I forced myself on her, but we all know that a common girl like her, raised in an orphanage, is likely to be lying." He shrugged and looked around at the gathered audience as though he could scarcely believe what was happening. "That's not true." Addie heard the way her voice was trembling with frustration and knew that she would not be believed even if she tried to put her side of the story across. "She's a woman of loose morals," Rhoda stated boldly, turning around to encourage the other servants to agree with her. Several of them nodded uncertainly, glancing nervously toward Frederick. "I saw Adeline flirting with Frederick earlier," she continued. Behind them all, the nursery door creaked open, and Georgina and Elliot's faces appeared in the crack. They rubbed the sleep from their eyes, looking alarmed. "You see, Mrs. Alsop," Rhoda continued self-righteously, "what sort of nanny would behave in such a way in front of the children?" She edged toward Frederick and gave him a warm smile. "I believe you, sir, no matter what she might say." Mrs. Jephson appeared at the end of the landing in a flurry of ribbons and silk, tying her voluminous dressing gown around her, and Addie's heart sank. "Will everyone apart from Adeline, Rhoda, Mrs. Alsop, and Frederick, please go back to your bedrooms," she said firmly once she had gotten an idea of what was happening. Frederick sighed loudly as he watched the servants melt away. "I will not stay here and have my name slandered, Catherine. If anything, she should be fired and pack her things to leave this very night." "That's not fair. I didn't." Frederick held his hand up and gave Addie a magnanimous smile. "It's not my household, so the final decision rests with Catherine. I just wanted you to know that if you worked for me, I would not be so lenient." With a curt nod of his head, he strolled away, glancing back only to give Rhoda a small wink, which made her blush. "I swear I saw her flirting with him earlier, Mrs. Jephson. I expect poor Georgina and Elliot will be having nightmares for weeks, with her screaming the house down the way she did." "Thank you, Rhoda. Please move your belongings back into the nursery," Mrs. Jephson said wearily. She folded her arms and waited until Rhoda had left, then turned to look at Addie with disappointment written all over her face. Addie hung her head. "Please, Mrs. Jephson, I did nothing to encourage Frederick. I was just coming up the back stairs, and he appeared in front of me, then followed me." She gave Mrs. Alsop a pleading look, and the housekeeper gave a tiny nod of understanding. She knew who was to blame in this instance. "It would be a shame to lose Miss Webb from the household completely," she murmured. "She works well, and good maids are hard to come by these days." Mrs. Jephson looked troubled and sighed again. "I can't have you working with the children, Adeline. If my husband found out about this, he would take Frederick's side, even though he does have a certain reputation, I hear." Mrs. Alsop nodded vigorously. There was that trouble with young Molly. The poor girl had to leave under a cloud. "Also, I cannot in all good conscience write you a letter of recommendation. My husband would never agree to it, especially if Frederick tells him it was all your fault, which leaves me in a dilemma. Please don't throw me out onto the street, ma'am." "What about some work in the kitchen, ma'am?" Mrs. Alsop suggested. "Cook said you were thinking of employing another kitchen maid to help her. That way, Adeline would be out of sight from the master, but you would still be able to make use of her." "I would be most grateful for any position you can give me, ma'am," Addie said eagerly. "Although I will miss Georgina and Elliot dreadfully." Mrs. Jephson gave her a small smile. "It is regrettable that you won't be able to care for the children, I agree. They did like you, but Rhoda was the nanny before, and I'm sure she'll pick it up again. You may work in the kitchen for 3 months, Miss Webb. If, after that, your record is unblemished, perhaps you might be able to have some small role with the children again under Rhoda's supervision. Gather up your things and find a bed with one of the other maids in the attic." "Thank you for the way you have dealt with this so generously," Addie said as Mrs. Jephson walked away. She knew that the lady of the house believed her, and although her heart felt heavy at the thought of not being Georgina and Elliot's nanny anymore, her situation could have been so much worse. Many servants were thrown out onto the streets for less. So she had to be grateful for the kitchen maid job and Mrs. Jephson's willingness to find her a different role in the household. She kissed the children goodnight for the last time, lingering over their drowsy faces to reassure them that she would be thinking of them every day and that Miss Macklin would be delighted to look after them again. Then she gathered her belongings into the old carpet bag from the orphanage and trudged up the narrow stairs to the servants' quarters in the attic. A narrow bed with thin blankets awaited her, but she was consoled by the fact that at least she was sharing a room with Miranda, who could always be relied on to look on the bright side of any situation. Addie's determination to make the best of her new position in the kitchen was tested almost daily over the next few weeks. Although Cook was pleased to have an extra pair of hands helping her, she was a hard taskmaster, and it felt like a backward step to return to such a lowly position after Addie had gotten so used to being in charge of everything in the nursery. Cook watched her like a hawk, and all too often was determined to find fault with what she did. The other kitchen maid, Wendy, resented Addie's presence and took every opportunity to make sure that she was given the worst job. What made it even worse was that the scullery maid left a few days after Addie started working in the kitchen, so Cook decided that Addie might as well take on the scullery maid's duties as well. By the end of the day, every muscle in her body ached, and her hands were red raw from hours of scrubbing food-encrusted dishes in the steaming water that Cook insisted on. The leisurely hours in the nursery, encouraging the children to read, were a distant memory. Now Addie's days were filled with chopping, stirring, scouring dishes, and then scrubbing the kitchen floor after everyone else had gone to bed. One of the hardest things for Addie was how much she missed the children. Occasionally, she would glimpse Rhoda with them in the garden and would have to bite her tongue not to comment on how indifferent Rhoda seemed to their happiness. "You're not so full of yourself now, are you?" Wendy said one day, as she saw Addie look longingly through the scullery window to where the children were picking flowers outside in the rose garden. "We all know what Master Frederick is like. You should have taken better care to stay out of his way." Addie merely nodded, knowing that Wendy was probably right, and continued peeling a mountain of potatoes. She wondered whether, If she bided her time for long enough, Rhoda would get bored of the nanny position, and it might become hers again one day. "What are you doing, looking out of the window and daydreaming?" Cook scolded as she bustled into the scullery. Her face was red and cross at the thought of how much work had to be done before luncheon could be served. "You may as well iron all the tablecloths and napkins as soon as you finish those potatoes," she snapped. "There's no good wishing things were different, Adeline. You should count yourself lucky to have this job, and if all goes well, you might be here for 20 years or more, like me." When Addie warily climbed the stairs later that night, she finally gave in to her sadness at how much her life had changed. Becoming a housemaid at Warburgley Mansion after leaving the orphanage as a shy young girl had felt like a dream come true. But she had grown up since then. The year of being Georgina and Elliot's nanny had ignited something unexpected deep in her heart. "I want a husband who loves me and children of my own to care for." The thought had filled her heart with yearning almost every hour since she had been banished from the nursery. But she knew that her life, hidden away in the kitchen, would probably leave her a lonely spinster with no chance of finding love. As the nanny, she had been somebody, but now she was nothing, just a lowly scullery maid. At the idea of her life stretching ahead of her, seeing the other maids find love and marry, but never her having the same for herself, tears rolled down her cheeks, and she wished for the 100th time that Frederick Jephson had never come to stay. "Cheer up, Addie," Miranda said a moment later. She came into their bedroom. She carried a candle to the small table under the eaves in the corner of the room and laid out her writing supplies. "Cook seems to have it in for you at the moment, and Frederick should never have been allowed to get away with what he did, but you have to put it in the past. That young maid, Molly, was sent out west to have his baby so that there wouldn't be a scandal in the family, so it's lucky you screamed when you did. It could have been a lot worse." Addie dried her tears and unpinned her hair to brush it. "I suppose so. Did you ever hear from her again?" "Well, the funny thing is, I did. She sent me a letter not long ago to say that, although she regretted losing her job, moving west was the best thing that ever happened to her. She found herself a lovely husband, and they are expecting their first baby together. That's why I decided to look at the paper." "The paper?" Addie asked. She paused from brushing her hair, wondering what Miranda was talking about. "You know, the Matrimonial Times. Surely you've heard of it?" Miranda reached under her bed and pulled a tattered newspaper out from underneath it, passing it to Addie. Addie turned the pages curiously. She had heard of the Matrimonial Times, but never actually read one. She was surprised to see page after page of advertisements from men advertising for a wife. They were from as far afield as Montana, Oregon, Wyoming, California. She could hardly believe there were so many. "Prosody rate %. Are you writing to a gentleman from one of these advertisements?" she asked, looking at Miranda's pen and paper. Miranda gave her friend a mischievous smile. "Actually, I replied to 3 gentlemen," she said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hoped that at least that way one of them might write back to me because he liked me. I expect lots of ladies answer the advertisements, but one gentleman did seem rather taken with my reply, and we have been exchanging letters for several months." Addie's mouth gaped open in surprise. "What a dark horse you are, Miranda. I never realized you were doing this." "It's my chance for freedom," Miranda said with a chuckle. "The gentleman I'm writing to is called Jack, and he has his own lumber business in Montana. Imagine that," she exclaimed. "His own business?" Addie couldn't hide the shock in her voice. It seemed unbelievable that a lowly housemaid could marry a gentleman of means, and she wondered whether Miranda had been completely truthful about her own situation. In New York, a maid would only ever marry someone with a similar background, she thought to herself. "Yes, I can scarcely believe it myself. That's what Molly told me in her letter, that the usual constraints in New York don't seem to apply out west. Ladies from all sorts of backgrounds travel out and marry doctors, lawyers, and even ranchers with land of their own. It doesn't seem to matter where you come from or what you did before. You should try it too, Addie," she urged. As the candle flickered on the table and Miranda wrote her next letter to Jack, Addie whiled away the next hour reading the advertisements, even though she found it hard to believe that marrying well could be this simple. Is this a safe and proper way to find a husband? What if it doesn't work out, and I end up with no job and no home? Her mind went back to Cook's comment about how she should count herself lucky to have 20 years or more working in the kitchens for the Jephson family, and she shuddered slightly, reading the advertisements with a renewed determination. Perhaps there was nothing to lose, and if it had worked for Miranda, then why shouldn't it work for her as well? She thought about what she would most like in a husband. She wanted a man who shared her faith in the Lord and who would like to have children together with her. Most of all, she had a yearning to be part of a large family, to make up for all those lonely years when she had had no one of her own. One advertisement caught her eye because it seemed to leap out and fulfill everything she wanted. For the first time in weeks, her heart lifted, full of hope as she read it. Andrew Sanford, a 25-year-old Wyoming rancher, seeks a young woman to become his bride. I have never been married and would like a young woman in the same situation who would like to have children and be part of a large extended family. I am hardworking, and it is very important that my wife would be happy to look after the home and work the ranch alongside me. My parents and siblings live nearby, and we enjoy visiting the church and supporting our small community. If you are a hardworking, God-fearing woman looking for a new start out west, come out, please write to Mr. Sanford. Addie could scarcely sleep that night. Her head was filled with dreams of wide-open spaces, riding across grassy paddocks with a rugged man by her side, and sitting around a large table surrounded by a happy family. The newspaper was several weeks old, and she told herself that Mr. Sanford had probably already received dozens of replies, for surely he would be the sort of man that any young woman would want to marry. But if I don't try, I will never know. That was the final thought that Addie had as she eventually drifted off to sleep. The following morning, she rose earlier than usual and knelt by her bed, seeking guidance from God for what felt like such a huge step in her life. By the time she had finished her prayers and tied her starched apron around her waist to begin the day's chores, she had decided that it couldn't hurt to at least send a letter expressing her interest and to leave the rest in the hands of the Lord. A few weeks later, Addie could not remember having had such a bad day. Everything which could have gone wrong had gone wrong. She had gotten distracted by Wendy's incessant chattering and burnt the gravy for lunch, and Cook was cross with her for not making sure that the greengrocer had delivered everything on her list. To make matters worse, she had seen Rhoda shouting at the children and making them cry simply because they had been too noisy playing in the garden. It was almost a relief to be left alone in the kitchen at the end of the day to scrub the floor, with just her thoughts for company. By the time she was climbing the stairs to go to bed, Addie had all but told herself that there was no point expecting a letter back from Mr. Sanford. It had already been several weeks since she had sent her reply, and Miranda had received 2 letters from Jack in that time. Clearly, marriage to a man out west was not in her future, she thought ruefully. "A letter came for you," Miranda cried happily as Addie closed the bedroom door behind her. "Open it now. It must be from him." Chapter 5. New York, 1881. Addie's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope and pulled the letter out. All her aches and pains were forgotten. "I expect it's just to say I'm not suitable," she muttered so that she wouldn't be disappointed. "Don't be silly," Miranda said, getting into her nightgown. "He must be interested if he's written back. I'm going to fetch water for the washstand while you read it, but I'll be back in a moment." Addie took a deep breath, hoping her friend was right. "Dear Miss Webb, I received your letter and would very much like to enter into correspondence with you. I appreciate that much about my life. Must seem strange to someone working in a grand house in New York. But I look forward to answering your questions and telling you a little bit about my work and my family. It pleased me greatly to see that you want to be part of a large extended family. I know some women would find this off-putting. I'm afraid Rocky River does not yet have a photographer, as some of the larger towns do. I am tall and have dark hair, if you are wondering. It was very kind of you to include a photograph in your letter, and I am surprised that you are not yet married with such charming looks." Addie clasped her hands to her chest and smiled delightedly as Miranda returned, feeling very grateful that her friend had persuaded her to reply to the advertisement. She went on to read the rest of his letter. He described a close family with several brothers and sisters, most of whom were already married with children, and a host of cousins who also lived nearby. The thought of being welcomed into such a large family filled her heart with joy. "What does he say?" Miranda asked after she had washed her face. Addie read the letter out to her, and they were both beaming by the time she came to the end of it. "He sounds perfect for you," Miranda sighed happily, "and he will be lucky to have you as his wife," she added generously. "Will you tell him about being raised in an orphanage?" Addie nodded. "I don't want to start our correspondence based on lies or half-truths, so yes, I think I must. Besides, it's nothing to be ashamed of." Over the next few weeks, Addie grew to eagerly await each letter from Mr. Sanford, gradually learning a little bit more about his family each time. In return, she shared some of her hopes for the future and explained that family was particularly important to her because she had been raised in St. Stephen's Orphanage. They discussed tidbits of news about where they lived and books they enjoyed. And with each letter they exchanged, Addie could feel herself growing more hopeful for a future that might offer her a better life than being at Warburgley Mansion. Then, just as spring was turning into summer, the letter she had been hoping for finally arrived. "My dearest Adeline, I feel that as I have gotten to know you better through our letters, I have also become sure that I would like you to become my wife. I admire the way that you say you want to work hard on the ranch with me. I was hesitant in my initial advertisement to make it clear that I wanted a hard-working wife, but that's what ranching involves, and I am very glad it has not put you off. If you would like to marry me, Adeline, I would like to become your husband. I will gladly send you the money to travel west, as well as enough to cover your other expenses, as I expect you might not have savings. If my invitation pleases you, will you write back and let me know, and then we can arrange the best time for you to take the railroad to Hudsonville, and then the stagecoach onward to Rocky River. I look forward to your reply." Addie could scarcely believe her good fortune. Since the incident with Frederick, she had started to wonder whether the shadow of doubt that it had somehow been her fault would always hang over her. But now she had a chance to make a fresh start, far away where nobody would gossip about her or consider her less than suitable because of her humble upbringing. She seized a pen and paper and wrote back as fast as she could, accepting Mr. Sanford's proposal. He was offering her marriage, a family, a kind-hearted husband she could work alongside, and a place to call home. Her days of toiling in the kitchen under Cook's critical eye and shrinking from Rhoda's never-ending barbed reminders about her fall from grace would soon be over. She was heading to Wyoming, and it couldn't come soon enough. A few days later, Addie carried a heavy bucket of water out of the front door of Warburgley Mansion and onto the top step. The sun was already warm on her back as she wet the brush in the water and began the laborious task of scrubbing the front steps from top to bottom. Wendy had taken particular delight in suggesting to Mrs. Alsop that it should be Addie's job, knowing full well that it would heap even more to the public humiliation onto her, to highlight in public her fall from grace at no longer being the family's nanny. What Wendy didn't know was that Addie's spirits were no longer dampened by such things. From morning to night, her mind was full of happy thoughts about looking forward to traveling west to marry a handsome rancher. And as she put her energy into making sure the steps were spotless, rasping the brush through the suds, she felt uplifted by the fact that very soon her hard work would be to build her own future with Andrew Sanford. A smile played on her mouth, and she hummed some of her favorite hymns as she moved methodically from step to step. When she was nearly at the bottom, she heard the large door opening above her, and her stomach lurched as she realized it was Frederick. He was staying for a few days, and so far she had managed to avoid him. "What have we here?" Frederick sneered. "Is it you, Adeline? What a change in circumstances for you. I hardly recognized you up to your elbows in soap suds." He strolled down the steps, standing deliberately on the areas she was trying to clean. "Good morning, sir," Addie said, not rising to his taunt. "It's a lovely day." Frederick bent down so that he could look at her more closely, examining her as though she were nothing more than an insect next to his elegant leather shoes. "I'm glad to see you've gotten your just rewards for spreading malicious rumors about me," he said coldly. Before Addie could reply, she heard the sound of Georgina and Elliot's voices drifting toward them. They were chattering excitedly as they came along the sidewalk with Rhoda, who was hurrying behind them. By the look of it, they had been to the park, and Elliot was carrying his favorite ball, which made Addie smile. "Miss Webb," the children exclaimed, "where have you been? We've missed you so much." Rhoda scowled, but Addie was touched that they still remembered her. "How are you, children?" she asked. "I have a new job now, which is why I can't be with you in the nursery anymore. I hope you've been behaving for Miss Macklin," she added, aware that Rhoda was simmering with anger. "Yes, Miss Webb is just the scullery maid now, children," Rhoda said with a spiteful glint in her eye. She fluttered her eyelashes at Frederick and gave him a coquettish smile. "How are you, Master Frederick?" "The house is always a much happier place when you are visiting." Frederick walked past Addie, carelessly standing on her apron, where she was still kneeling with the scrubbing brush, and put his hand around Rhoda's shoulder, pulling her to one side. "You're looking very beautiful today, Miss Macklin," he said in a low voice. "That bonnet is most becoming on you." Rhoda's cheeks flushed an unattractive red as she gazed up at him, unused to such flattery. "Thank you, sir. It's very kind of you to say so." Frederick shot the children an irritated glare as they chattered excitedly with each other. "Step this way with me, Miss Macklin," he continued smoothly. "I always find it rather dull staying with my brother, but time in your company makes it all worthwhile." Elliot huffed with frustration as he watched them walk away. He was hot and thirsty and wanted to go inside for a drink, but he knew Miss Macklin would tell them off if they didn't wait for her. He bounced his ball disconsolately at the side of the street with a rhythmical thud. "Stop doing that immediately," Rhoda said forcefully, annoyed that Elliot was spoiling her moment with Frederick. She bit her lip and then looked up into Frederick's dark eyes again, patting her straggling ringlets. "Sorry, sir. They have been very trying today." "I don't blame you for being irritated," Frederick replied with an amused smile. He trailed the tip of his finger down her cheek, and Addie's eyes widened with surprise at the blatant way he was flirting with her. "Miss Macklin, do you think the children should go inside?" she asked hastily. Surely Rhoda would not fall for such obvious charms when she knew what his reputation was like. Rhoda lifted her chin defiantly and turned her back to Addie. Georgina pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and started folding it to pass the time, and Elliot bounced his ball again. Just as Addie was about to whisper that she would take them inside, the ball hit a pebble and veered into the street. A carriage drawn by 4 gleaming black horses was rumbling towards them at speed. "My ball," Elliot cried. Addie stood up as quickly as she could, watching the ball roll toward the carriage with a sense of dread. She expected Rhoda to call out and tell Elliot to stand back, but out of the corner of her eye, she could see that all of Rhoda's attention was focused on Frederick as he whispered sweet nothings in her ear. "Elliot," she shouted. "Look out." It was too late. Elliot was already running after his ball straight into the path of the thundering horses. Without thinking, Addie picked up her skirts and darted after him, snatching him out of the way. Everything happened in a blur. The snorting of the horses, the howl of fright from Elliot, and Georgina's scream of terror as she feared her brother would be crushed beneath their hooves. And then everything went dark. Distant voices slowly filtered into Addie's consciousness, and she wondered why they sounded so concerned as she slowly opened her eyes. The first sight that greeted her was a circle of worried faces. "Where am I?" she asked, feeling confused. She tried to raise her head, and a wave of red-hot pain shot through her head and down her arm, making her feel nauseous. "Lie still, my dear," Mrs. Alsop said, leaning over her with a frown. "It's too soon to try and get up. Do you remember what happened?" she asked. Addie closed her eyes again. Faint memories of Elliot bouncing his ball, followed by the rumbling wheels of an approaching carriage, slowly came back to her. But there was more. She remembered Rhoda and Frederick standing so close that they almost looked as though they were about to kiss. Her eyes flew open again. "Is Elliot okay?" she gasped. "Was he hit by the horses?" "Hush now, Addie," Miranda said. She pressed a cold flannel against Addie's forehead, which provided some welcome relief from the pain. "The doctor just left, and he's very pleased with your progress. The accident happened 2 days ago, and he said that you need to drink this for a few more days." Mrs. Alsop passed Miranda a glass of water so she could hold it to Addie's lips. "It has drops of laudanum in it for your pain," she said. "You're lucky to be alive," she added, blinking back her tears. "We thought we'd lost you, my dear, but thankfully the Lord was looking after you, and we have prayed by your bedside." Addie took a few sips of the water and laudanum and felt the pain recede enough to be able to lift her head and look down at the bed where she was lying. Her arm was heavily bandaged on top of the faded patchwork quilt. "Do I have a cut?" she asked. "I can't really remember much after seeing Elliot run toward his ball." A small movement at the doorway took her attention, and she was surprised to see Mrs. Jephson there. "I'm sorry to be any trouble, ma'am," she said hastily. "I'll be back at my duties tomorrow." Mrs. Alsop glanced toward Mrs. Jephson, and Addie could see there was some sort of unspoken message passing between them. "It's no trouble," Mrs. Jephson said. She came closer to the bed and gently patted Addie's shoulder. "I'm afraid the doctor told us that it might be many months until you will be able to use your hand again, my dear. You saved Elliot's life, and for that, I will always be grateful. However, you were caught under the wheels of the carriage, and there was extensive damage to your hand." Tears pooled in Addie's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. Instead, she was filled with relief that Elliot was safe. "Thank you for bringing me news of Elliot, Mrs. Jephson. I do love both of the children very much, and knowing that Elliot wasn't hurt means the world to me." Mrs. Jephson smiled and turned to leave. "If there is anything you need to help your recovery, Miss Webb, please just say, and I will make sure that Mrs. Alsop takes care of it." "Yes, we'll look after you," Miranda chimed in. "My memory is still a little hazy," Addie muttered to herself, wishing she could shake the feeling she was missing something important. She glanced around the room, and her gaze fell on a small pile of letters on the table, tied in a pink ribbon, and she suddenly gasped. With all the drama of the accident, she had completely forgotten about Mr. Sanford's proposal. Fresh tears filled her eyes, and a small sob escaped from her lips. "What will Mr. Sanford think?" she asked Miranda, with a note of desperation in her voice. "He said time and again in his letters that he wanted a wife who would be able to work alongside him on the ranch. What if my hand never gets better, and I can't work with him?" Mrs. Jephson paused in the doorway and then came back into the room. "Am I to take it that you have been writing to a man out west to become a mail-order bride?" Addie hesitated and then nodded. She didn't have the strength or the inclination to lie to her mistress. "I've been corresponding with a rancher in Wyoming, and he proposed to me. I wrote back to accept his proposal, and I was going to tell you as soon as I knew for sure, Mrs. Jephson, I promise." She waited to see anger in Mrs. Jephson's face, but instead, she saw compassion as the woman glanced down at her bandaged arm. "A true gentleman would not worry about such a thing," Mrs. Alsop said stoutly. "If he knew how brave you had been, stepping in front of that carriage to save Elliot from harm, he would surely only think more of you, not less. But my hand, it's useless." Addie wanted to believe what Mrs. Alsop was saying. However, there was a seed of doubt in her mind, and she wondered whether her dream of love and marriage had withered and died before it had even begun. "Mrs. Alsop is quite correct," Mrs. Jephson agreed. "Love is not only about the way someone looks, it is far more than that. Am I too damaged to be his wife, Miranda?" "Be honest with me." Miranda shook her head. "You're always so determined, Addie. I know that even if your hand doesn't return to normal, you'll find a way to help him on the ranch." "I don't want to deceive him," Addie said fretfully. She sighed and looked across at the letters again, coming to a decision. "Will you write to Mr. Sanford on my behalf, Miranda? If I tell him about the accident and my hand, he will know what to expect, and I can tell him that even though my hand may not recover, my heart is willing, and I will do my best to work on the ranch." Miranda gave her a careful hug. "Of course I'll write the letter for you, Addie. He'd be a fool not to want to marry you." Addie blinked back her tears again. "If he does not want me as I am, then I have to accept it's the Lord's plan. But I hope he will." He sounded like a kind-hearted sort of man in his letters. Mrs. Jephson shuffled her feet, looking troubled by something. "Frederick left the house straight after the accident. But I have to admit, Miss Webb, that Miss Macklin was seen talking to him, which must be why she was distracted from minding the children." "I'm sure she didn't mean it," Addie replied after a small hesitation. "The thing is, we can't afford for any sort of scandal to get out about my husband's brother. It's bad enough that Miss Macklin was openly flirting with him in public. Harold is running for a position in the town council, and this is a sensitive matter," she added, almost to herself. "If word gets out that his servants are misbehaving, and Elliot was almost killed as a result, it wouldn't look good." "I promise I won't say anything," Addie said hastily. "I'm afraid my husband is rather set in his ways," Mrs. Jephson continued. "He thinks it would be best for you to leave our employment and have a fresh start. I had intended to help you find a position elsewhere. However, if you are already thinking about traveling west to marry, I have a better idea. I will ask Harold to provide enough money for your rail ticket and travel expenses, plus a little more to thank you for your bravery. But in return, you must promise to leave as soon as you are well enough. I shall make sure you have everything you need for your recovery until then." "Leave for good?" Addie's head was spinning from the effects of the laudanum. "You mean once I'm sure that Mr. Sanford still wants to marry me?" "I have every confidence that he will," Mrs. Jephson said quickly. Addie could only nod and agree, hoping that they would give her enough time to send her letter to Mr. Sanford, and for her to receive his reply. As everyone filed out of her room, she closed her eyes and prayed that he would still want to marry her. Chapter 6. New York, 1881. A week later, Addie was grateful to be up and about again. The pain was now at a manageable level, and although her arm and hand were still heavily bandaged, she had pleaded with Mrs. Alsop to be allowed to return to light duties rather than staying in bed alone with her thoughts all day. She peeked into the drawing room to make sure it was empty and bustled in with her duster and polish. "Good morning, ladies. I've missed you," she said, as she spotted her 3 favorite porcelain figurines. She tried not to think about the fact that she would never look as elegant as they did if her hand ended up being deformed. "The Lord gave me the chance to do something good for the children's sake and spared my life. Whatever happens next is in His hands." The thought gave Addie comfort. She glanced around the familiar room and walked toward one of the grand oil paintings she had always admired. It depicted sweeping plains with mountains beyond and a winding river with cattle grazing in the distance. It was how she imagined Rocky River might look, and peering closer, she saw that there was even a log cabin in the picture, tucked below the trees. Her heart beat a little faster as she wondered whether it was a sign from the Lord that she had always felt drawn to that painting. It was as if the Lord was whispering that this was her future. At least, she hoped so. Her thoughts turned back to the letter that Miranda had written for her, as promised. "Are you sure you should explain everything?" Miranda had asked as she dipped her pen in the ink. "Surely he won't mind that you injured yourself for such a kind-hearted reason?" For a split second it had felt tempting, but Addie shook her head, insisting on doing the right thing. "It wouldn't be fair on Mr. Sanford to see me arriving in bandages or even with a damaged hand. If our marriage is to work, then it needs to be based on the truth, don't you think?" Miranda had penned the letter, encouraging Addie not to be too modest about how she had saved Elliot from certain death, although Addie had made her play it down. The letter had been sent at the earliest opportunity, and Addie couldn't help but feel slightly uneasy that she had received no reply back yet. Every night, after blowing out her candle, she prayed that the following day might bring a letter from him, telling her that, of course, he still wanted the marriage to go ahead. But so far, Although Miranda had received another letter from Jack and was getting excited about her own wedding, there had been nothing for her. "Patience, Addie," she muttered to herself with a wry smile. Now that her departure was so close, every day still at Warburgley Mansion brought mixed emotions. She knew she would miss the children, but she could also feel the excitement bubbling up within her at the thought of a new beginning. As Addie dusted the mahogany sideboard, daydreaming about living out west, the door to the drawing room softly swung open. She turned around, startled to see Frederick standing in the middle of the room, looking at her with a strange expression. She hadn't even realized he was visiting. "I'm surprised to see you still here," he drawled. "I thought, after the way you allowed Elliot to run into the path of those horses, my brother would have sent you packing immediately." Addie bit back a spark of anger at his casual disregard for people's feelings. She had had enough of Frederick's lies and insinuations. "I think you'll find it was you distracting Miss Macklin, which almost caused Elliot's accident," she said firmly. Frederick shrugged as though he was already bored with the conversation. He stepped closer, looking at her bandaged arm with revulsion. "You should have taken my attention when you could," he said with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Nobody will want you now, not looking like that. I heard rumors that your hand is so damaged that nobody will ever give you a second glance, Miss Webb." The blood rushed to Addie's cheeks as Frederick articulated the very thing she feared most. "I already have a marriage proposal," she shot back without thinking, "to a handsome rancher in Wyoming. As it happens, he's a true gentleman, unlike you, and doesn't judge someone on how they look." She hoped it was true. Frederick's expression darkened, and he reached her side in 3 long strides, grabbing her shoulder. "So you would throw yourself at a complete stranger but not accept my affection, Miss Webb?" he snarled. "What sort of woman does that make you?" Addie tried to pull away from him, but all that did was inflame the anger and lust in his heart, and he tightened his grip. "Perhaps your disfigurement is a righteous punishment for denying me what I wanted," Frederick continued scornfully. Suddenly, he pulled her closer, crushing her against his chest and not caring when she yelped with pain. He lowered his head, intent on bending her to his will and determined to kiss her. "Get off me," Addie cried. "Mr. Sanford is 10 times the man you will ever be, Frederick. Everyone knows that you are cruel and uncaring, with no regard for a woman's reputation. That's why poor Molly had to leave under a cloud. Well, I'll have you know, she's made something of her life and married well. No thanks to you." She managed to wriggle free and pushed him away with her good hand. "I won't let you get away with this," Frederick growled. In a fit of rage, he turned and snatched up one of the 3 porcelain figurines, hurling it against the wall and laughing as it smashed into jagged shards all over the floor. The sound of running feet stopped Addie's scream in her throat. Her heart sank as she saw Mr. Jephson coming through the door with a thunderous expression, followed a moment later by Mrs. Jephson, who shot her a worried look. "Why is it that every time there is any trouble in this house, I find you at the heart of it, Miss Webb?" Harold Jephson demanded. His face was scarlet with anger, and he looked between her and Frederick. "What must people think? I know that the servants gossip between households, and you continue to behave in such a dreadful way, even when you know how important it is for me to have an unblemished reputation in this town." Frederick rolled his eyes in Addie's direction and smirked. "Frankly, Harold, I don't know why you still have her working for you," he remarked. "She is clumsy and rude. You're too soft with your servants, and they take advantage of your goodwill. You should hear what people are saying at the gentlemen's club," he added, leaving his words hanging in the air. Mr. Jephson's brow creased into a frown. "That's exactly what I'm worried about." He glanced toward Catherine. "This has gone on for long enough, my dear," he said. "I cannot have word getting out that my household is in disarray just because of this wretched maid." "It wasn't my fault." "I did not say that you could speak, Miss Webb," Mr. Jephson snapped, cutting off her plea of innocence. "I am sure you will try and tell us yet again that this was not your doing. But this is the 2nd time I have found you standing in the drawing room with one of my dearest late wife's figurines smashed all over the floor. Your behavior is intolerable, and I demand that you must leave Warburgley Mansion immediately. My patience has worn thin, and you must go." "Are you sure about this, Harold?" Mrs. Jephson murmured. She placed her hand on his arm to pacify him, but he still looked enraged. "Remember, Miss Webb did put herself in great danger to save Elliot from harm. Perhaps we should give her the benefit of the doubt. I'm sure she didn't do this on purpose." Frederick gave a humorous chuckle. "The women of this house seem to be running rings around you, Harold," he remarked. "Remind me who's in charge?" "I have made my mind up, Catherine," Mr. Jephson said sharply. "Miss Webb must leave today. However, I am not a cruel man, and I know we agreed that I would pay for her to travel west." He turned to Addie and gave her a cold stare. "Pack your bags, and I will ensure that Mrs. Alsop gives you the money for your rail fare as agreed." With that, he turned on his heel and marched out of the room, followed by Frederick, who sauntered away, whistling cheerfully under his breath. "I'm sorry, Adeline," Mrs. Jephson said as she drifted toward the door to follow her husband. "Harold's mind is made up, and I can't go against his wishes. Please know that I am very grateful for everything you have done for us, but as Harold said, I'm afraid you must leave today. We have important guests coming for dinner tonight, and I don't want Harold worrying about all this." She gave Addie a small smile. "I wish you all the best in your new life in Wyoming and a happy marriage." Addie waited until everybody had gone and then crept out of the drawing room, tiptoeing toward the servants' quarters in the hope that she wouldn't encounter Frederick again. Her mind was whirling with everything which had just taken place. 1 minute, she had been minding her own business, doing her best to recuperate, and now, thanks to Frederick, she would be homeless before the end of the day. It felt like a devastating way to end her time working for the Jephson family. "What's happened?" Mrs. Alsop asked, hurrying toward her down the corridor. "I heard raised voices. Was it something to do with Master Frederick again?" Addie was determined not to cry, but Mrs. Alsop's kindness unleashed a torrent of sadness, and her shoulders shook as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Mr. Jephson said I have to leave today," she sobbed. "Frederick attacked me and then smashed one of the figurines when I turned down his advances again." There, my lovely." Mrs. Alsop put her arm around Addie's shoulder and ushered her into the kitchen. Even Cook had the good grace to give her a kindly smile, and Wendy bobbed her head apologetically. "I overheard Mr. Jephson telling you off," Wendy said. "I bet it was Frederick's fault, though, wasn't it? That man's a menace," she added in an angry whisper. Addie nodded and accepted a clean handkerchief from Mrs. Alsop to dry her tears. "He smashed the figurine, but it was pointless asking him to admit it. I know I was planning on leaving anyway, but this has taken me by surprise. I haven't heard back from Mr. Sanford yet, so I don't even know whether he wants me to travel west to meet him." "Miranda told me that she sent your letter several weeks ago," Mrs. Alsop said, giving her an encouraging look. "I'm sure that no news is good news, and your gentleman out west will be delighted to meet you. After all, he did propose to you and wants to marry you, Addie. That's what you have to remember." "Perhaps I have been a little hard on you in the past," Cook said, "but you are an attractive young woman and hard-working. Even with your injury, you couldn't wait to get back to doing light duties. You're kind-hearted and pretty. I'm sure he can't wait to marry you." Wendy added admiringly, which surprised Addie. She poured Addie a cup of tea and passed it to her. "I think it's time for you to think of your future and put yourself first. Frederick is staying here for the next few days, so it's not safe for you to be in his company. And once Mr. Jephson gets an idea in his head, there's no turning him." "He seemed more than happy to pay for my railroad ticket," Addie murmured. "Anything to get you away, even though it should be Master Frederick who should leave," Cook grumbled. "I think you know it's for the best," Mrs. Alsop said softly. She pulled Addie into a hug. "We'll all miss you. Promise you'll send us a letter telling us all about life with Mr. Sanford. But now, I think it's time to pack." Addie finished her cup of tea and slipped up the back stairs to the bedroom under the eaves. It felt strange to pack her meager belongings back into the carpetbag which had come with her from St. Stephen's Orphanage. She waited until Rhoda had gone to the kitchen to fetch her luncheon and slipped into the nursery to bid the children farewell. "I'll always remember you," she said, "and I'll send you a letter telling you all about the plants and wildlife in Wyoming." Blinking back her tears, she hurried back to the kitchen to say her goodbyes, and Mrs. Alsop handed her a pouch of money, as promised. Was it bribery? Being paid off to protect Frederick? She wasn't sure, but she realized she no longer cared. The money was her ticket to freedom, whatever the future might hold. "Good luck, Addie," Miranda said, clinging onto Addie for a long hug and blinking back her tears. "I'll be heading west soon, too. What wonderful adventures we'll have," she added with a sniff. Within a few hours, Warburgley Mansion was consigned forever to her past, and Addie found herself settled into the corner seat of the carriage, which would be her home for the next few days. The train chugged its way out of New York, and she watched the grimy buildings slide past the window through the billowing steam and felt herself growing sleepier with each mile that passed. The rocking of the carriage felt like being suspended in some sort of limbo, where the past had gone and the future was yet to reveal itself. Her good hand rested on her lap, where she had Mr. Sanford's letters in her pocket. And as she drifted off to sleep, she imagined herself stepping off the train at the end of her journey and seeing the vast open plains and mountains he had described in his letters. Finally, she would have a family of her own and a husband who loved her. Chapter 7. On the Railroad, 1881. Jacob Muswell leaned back in his seat and gave a small sigh of relief at the sight of his nephew lying fast asleep in his arms. Not 10 minutes earlier, Nathan had been crawling around his feet and grabbing the edge of the seat, trying to pull himself up into a standing position. At almost 1 year old, it wouldn't be long until he would be toddling and into everything. For now, thankfully, he was asleep, which Jacob knew was a welcome mercy on the moving train, which juddered and rocked from side to side with alarming regularity. Looking down at the little boy's angelic expression as he slept, Jacob's heart squeezed with a mixture of affection and pity. None of this was his fault, and Jacob wanted to give his nephew the love, which sadly had been snatched away from him all too soon. He closed his own eyes, but sleep eluded him, even though he was fast learning that it was best to try and get some rest when Nathan was asleep, because as soon as he woke up again, he would be on the go. How on earth would he manage when he reached Wyoming? Suddenly, he wondered whether he had been foolhardy in taking responsibility for Nathan. But what choice did he have? He couldn't bear the thought of consigning the little boy to life in an orphanage, and he couldn't turn his back on his own flesh and blood, especially as Nathan was now his only close relative. Perhaps there might be a surplus of kind-hearted old ladies where he was headed, he wondered. The sort of person his own ma might have been, had she still been alive, who would be eager to help out and care for the little boy so that Jacob would be able to fulfill his work duties as the town's new apothecary. His mind drifted, and he was almost able to picture the sort of woman he hoped might end up being his neighbor. A gray-haired lady, whose own family had long since grown, who would scoop Nathan up, delighted by his mischievous ways, and give him the sort of attention that would come effortlessly to her. Failing that, he wondered whether there might be a few ladies in the church, with a horde of their own children, who might welcome the chance of earning a little extra money by caring for Nathan with their own brood while he worked. He sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. There was no point trying to sleep, not when he had so many questions and uncertainties swirling through his mind. All he could do was pray that the Lord would help him figure things out once they arrived. Glancing around the carriage, he wondered idly about the other travelers making the journey west with him. They seemed like a mixed bunch. There were 2 elderly ladies who looked so similar that he assumed they must be sisters. They talked to each other in muted whispers, their heads bowed toward each other and their knitting needles clicking in unison. A little further down, there were 3 soldiers in dusty uniforms who kept themselves to themselves. There was a noisy family who talked loudly about joining the father's brother so they could earn more money at the mines than at the job at the shipyard he had left. The mother frequently delved into her basket to pull parcels of food out to try and keep her 4 children quiet. Then there was also a middle-aged man whose thinning hair was combed over his balding head and set with pomade, and who dressed in the style that he associated with a traveling salesman. He had a large banded trunk stored at the end of the carriage, which he checked every couple of hours. Lastly, Jacob's eye wandered toward the person who intrigued him most, a young woman who seemed to be traveling alone and had attracted the attention of the middle-aged man. Jacob noticed that the man had stopped 3 times already to try and engage her in conversation. The woman had been polite but was clearly uninterested. He watched her now, wondering why she was traveling west. Every now and again, she patted a pocket in her dress as though there was something important in there. He had noticed that when she did so, she smiled, but behind the smile, he saw a shadow of worry cross her face as well. The children from the large family were getting restless, and the young woman leaned toward the mother, offering her help. She pulled a book from her carpet bag and read it quietly to several of the children, who perched on the edge of the seat opposite her and listened, round-eyed and entranced with the story. She clearly had a natural way with children, he thought ruefully, wishing he could say the same about himself. When she had finished reading the story, the young woman stood up and smoothed the creases out of her dress before walking up and down the carriage several times to stretch her legs. They were traveling across a flat, dusty plain, and mercifully, the train had stopped juddering and was progressing smoothly. Nathan shifted in Jacob's arms, and for a few moments, his attention was diverted as he tried to settle the little boy again. Even with his limited experience, he knew that Nathan needed to sleep longer than the brief time he had managed so far. "You were able to get your baby to sleep then?" The voice was quiet and gentle, and Jacob looked up to see the young woman smiling down at Nathan. She had small dimples in her cheeks, and there was a softness in her demeanor that gave him a strange, breathless feeling in his chest. "I think it was more the movement of the train than any skill on my part," he replied with a wry smile. "How old is your little boy?" "Coming up for 1 year old, but he's not my son. He's my nephew. I'm still finding my feet looking after him. He's only been in my care for the last few weeks." Jacob hadn't meant to say so much to a complete stranger, but realized that he welcomed her interest. It was surprising how lonesome a person could feel even surrounded by people. "I see," the woman said thoughtfully. "Is he an orphan, or perhaps you're taking him back to his parents?" Her gaze lingered on Nathan, and she smiled again. Jacob thought it looked slightly wistful, as though she had experienced some sort of loss. Or perhaps he was reading too much into the situation. He's an orphan. Or at least, he would have been. Now that she was standing closer to him, he could see that her blue eyes were flecked with hazel, and her dark hair glinted as though it had strands of copper in it when it caught the sunlight through the carriage window. She had a natural sort of beauty, the type that he admired, but seemed to be unaware of the other gentleman in the carriage turning to stare at her. Wholesome and modest, not vain, he found himself thinking. He also noticed that she stood angled slightly away from him, as though she wanted to hide her arm. He had seen the bandages on her hand earlier when she was asleep, and her shawl had slipped off. He wondered what had caused her injury. "It's good of you and your wife to take him in," she continued, glancing up the carriage as if she expected to see someone join him. "That sort of kindness will make all the difference to him," she added. It sounded like she was speaking from experience, which piqued his curiosity even further. Perhaps she would have some advice for him, and he sure could use some good advice. "Wife?" Jacob realized he had given her the wrong impression. "No, I'm afraid it's just me looking after him. I'm not married." The woman's cheek flushed, and he kicked himself for blabbering so much. He had gotten rusty when it came to making polite conversation, and he was blundering in, embarrassing her with details she probably wasn't interested in. "If it's just you looking after him, then you're doing a great job," she said, much to his surprise. She made moves to return to her seat, but then looked back over her shoulder at him. "The people opposite me got off at the first stop. I'd be very happy to help you with your nephew if you would care to move to that seat." She glanced down at her bandaged hand. "As long as we're sitting down, I would be able to hold him for you and give you a break if that would be helpful." Jacob grinned up at her in gratitude. "I think you must be an angel sent from heaven," he said with a chuckle. "Nathan has a good set of lungs on him, and I was worried that he might end up hollering all day and all night and annoy the other passengers." He stood up carefully so as not to wake Nathan and followed her across the carriage to the empty seat she had suggested. "At least you're by a window here, which I'm sure will help entertain him when he wakes up. They're so curious at that age. It's lovely to see." "Are you traveling out west to join family?" Jacob asked conversationally. "Oh, no," she said after a moment's hesitation. "I'm a mail-order bride," she explained. "I used to work for a very wealthy family in New York, but due to one thing and another, I found myself in a situation where I needed to leave and make my own way in life. I've been writing to a rancher in Wyoming, and we're to be married when I arrive." "A mail-order bride, huh?" I wondered why there were so many young ladies waiting at the station to board the train. "I guess you must not be the only one." Jacob squirreled the information away, realizing that this could be the perfect answer to his dilemma. Once he was settled into his new job, he might be able to meet a bride in the same way. Of course, it would have to be someone who would be willing to love Nathan as a mother, but it was definitely something he could consider. He leaned forward. "Would you mind telling me a little more about it?" he asked. "Although I'm not married now, I have already thought that I would like Nathan to have a mother in his life, and this could be the perfect solution." He grinned at her a little apologetically. "I'm running away with myself again, aren't I?" "No, it's nice to have someone to talk to." "I haven't even introduced myself. My name is Jacob Muswell, and I'm headed to a place called Rocky River in Wyoming to become the apothecary." The woman looked surprised. "Rocky River? What a coincidence. That's where I'm going as well. At least that's the town nearest to Mr. Sanford's ranch." She smiled back at him. "I guess I should introduce myself as well. I am Adeline Webb, although my friends call me Addie. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Webb." For the next few minutes, she explained how her friend Miranda had persuaded her to look at the advertisements in a newspaper called the Matrimonial Times, and that one, in particular, had stood out to her. She had corresponded with the gentleman over a few months, and he had proposed by letter. Jacob felt a ripple of alarm on her behalf. She was traveling west to marry a man she had never met, which seemed like a risky way to go about something that would last for the rest of her life. "This gentleman you're going to meet," he pondered, "is he a God-fearing man? Of good standing in the community? How do you know he will treat you with the respect that you deserve?" He knew he was probably asking too many questions, but thinking about his sister's situation in the past, he couldn't help himself. "He told me in his letters that he has a large extended family, some of whom live at the ranch with him. There are brothers and sisters with children of their own, and cousins as well, by the sounds of things, plus his elderly parents. He mentioned that they like to go to church and do things to help the community. I figured he seems like a kind-hearted sort of man, the way he described his life." Jacob nodded, relieved that she had not been offended by his question. "As you say, it's not as if you're going to meet a man with nobody to hold him to account. It sounds like you're looking forward to being part of a large family." Addie gave him a shy smile that gave him the breathless feeling in his chest again. "You mentioned that your nephew Nathan had been orphaned. I was raised in an orphanage in New York. It's not as bad as it sounds," she added. "I had a good education, and Sister Mary took good care of us in her own way, although we did all long to have a family of our own. I was lucky enough to be chosen to work at Warburgley Mansion, which was wonderful until, well, I won't bore you with what happened. I understand now why life on a ranch with all that family around you must be so appealing," Jacob replied. He looked down at Nathan, who was starting to stir again, and shifted him slightly so that he would be more comfortable. "It will be very different from New York. You must be excited, huh?" Addie hesitated for a moment, and he wondered why. It seemed like more than just nerves about joining a new family. "I am," she said slowly, "although there is something worrying me." She glanced down at her bandaged hand. Mr. Sanford told me that he wanted a hard-working wife who would be able to work alongside him on the ranch, which I was happy about because I like to keep busy. She looked out of the window for a moment before continuing. The problem is, I had an accident not long before leaving New York. I was worried that it might affect his decision about whether he still wanted to marry me. I even wrote him a letter to tell him about it and ask if he was happy for me to join him. Jacob felt a jolt of shock at her confession. Why would he mind? He spluttered. Surely an accident is not something you would have wished upon yourself. Honesty matters to me, Mr. Muswell. I wanted to start our relationship on an honest footing. A noble sentiment, and something which should show him what a good wife you will make. Jacob felt a sudden surge of protectiveness toward this young woman who was placing her trust and future in the hands of someone she had never met, and hoped that Mr. Sanford would feel the same way. The trouble is that something happened which meant I had to leave sooner than planned. Mrs. Alsop, the housekeeper, encouraged me to travel, even though I hadn't heard back from him. She said everything would be fine, but I have to confess I'm not so sure. I hope you don't mind me saying, but you seem to carry your bag onto the train perfectly well, Jacob said, and I'm sure you wouldn't have offered to help me with Nathan if you didn't feel confident to do so. But what if I can't work on the ranch as Mr. Sanford wants? I only returned to light duties when I was a maid, so I'm not sure whether my hand will ever get back to normal. And what if it withers and leaves me a cripple, and he can't bear to look at me? She added under her breath, turning her head away again to hide her emotions. Mr. Sanford would be a fool if he let something like this prevent him from marrying someone as kind and thoughtful as you, Miss Webb. You don't seem like the sort of woman who would agree to marry a fool. Addie chuckled, and the worried frown on her face vanished. You have a way of making everything seem all right. Mr. Muswell. The trouble with traveling alone is that I have too much time on my hands to think the worst might happen. You must have read my mind, Miss Webb, Jacob replied, feeling happy that he had managed to bring her smile back. I was thinking exactly the same thing until you spoke to me. Really? What were you worrying about? Jacob looked down at Nathan. Mainly how I'll be able to do my work properly if I don't find someone to help me look after this little one, he said lightly. But don't worry. I've already prayed plenty about it. I figured I wouldn't have come back into my sister's life just in time to take Nathan into my custody if the Lord didn't have a plan for us. I just need to be sure to pay attention to what he's guiding me to do. He must miss his parents, Addie said softly. She was too polite to ask outright what had happened to leave Nathan an orphan. His ma, for sure, Jacob replied. He looked into Addie's clear blue eyes and decided he trusted her enough to be honest with her. His pa? Not so much. He left the moment things got difficult and hasn't been seen for months. Broke Sandra's heart and little Nathan's too, I expect. You see. Before Jacob had a chance to say any more, Nathan's eyes sprang open, and his face turned red as he arched his back and started to sob loudly. Jacob started to feel flustered as the other people in the carriage craned their necks to see what was making him cry so uncontrollably and attempted to jiggle him on his lap, hoping it would comfort him. I'm sorry, he said, apologizing to the folks nearest him. Nathan wriggled in his arms even more. Hush now, Nathan. Uncle Jacob is here. It's perfectly normal, Mr. Muswell, Addie said, giving him a reassuring smile. She reached her good arm forward. Would you like me to hold him for you? I expect he's just disoriented is all. They like a routine at this age, and he'll be missing his ma, she added tenderly. Jacob heaved a sigh of relief. I keep thinking I'm doing everything wrong, and I'll give him a terrible childhood, he murmured. Addie seemed completely unperturbed by Nathan's howls, which had gotten louder and more fractious. His heart squeezed with pity at the boy's tears, and he wondered again if he was doing the right thing. How could he ever hope to fill the terrible hole left in Nathan's life by his ma's death and his pa's cowardly desertion? He reached across and placed Nathan in Addie's arms, and as if by magic, the sobs subsided to hiccups. Mama, Mama. Nathan's mumbled words became quieter as he gazed up into Addie's face and then nuzzled against her shawl, falling straight back to sleep again. Mama? Jacob had been looking after Nathan for several weeks already, and this was the first time he had felt like it wasn't a struggle. What this kind-hearted stranger had shown him was that Nathan needed a mother in his life. Jacob couldn't help but feel slightly envious of Mr. Sanford and hoped he would appreciate just how lucky he was to have found such a wonderful woman in Miss Adeline Webb. Chapter 8. Wyoming, 1881. Addie stretched her legs to ease her aching muscles, taking care not to knock Jacob's legs. His large frame looked uncomfortable, squeezed into the corner of the stagecoach, and she was grateful that they were the only two people traveling onward to Rocky River from Hudsonville, where the train had stopped. It would have been mighty cramped if the usual 6 people had been squashed into the interior of the small coach, which bounced uncomfortably over every rock and hole in the road. They had taken turns holding Nathan over the days and nights of their long journey, and the weight of him in her arms was starting to feel like he had always been there. She looked down at the little boy's soft, downy hair and the fan of his lashes on his plump cheeks, and felt a pang of loss at the thought that they were almost at their destination. Although she was excited to meet her fiancé, she would miss Nathan once Jacob took sole care of him again as they started their new lives in town. She watched Jacob surreptitiously as he slept. In spite of being tall herself, he was a good 4 or 5 inches taller than her, and his broad shoulders showed that, although he did not work outside, he was no stranger to physical labor. He had mentioned to her that he enjoyed carpentry when he didn't have his head buried in books about medicine, which probably explained his muscular physique. His sandy-colored hair had a slight curl where it touched his collar, and his brown eyes often glinted with warmth and amusement when he talked, usually in a self-deprecating manner at his own shortcomings. She marveled at the fact that they had gotten on so well right from the moment she had paused next to him to compliment him on getting Nathan to sleep on the train. Addie knew that she was rather naive when it came to men, but she found him so easy to talk to. She hoped that she would find it just as easy to talk to Mr. Sanford when they were together on the ranch. She smiled, thinking back to something Miranda had once told her about matters of the heart and why she had gotten on so well with one of the gardeners at Warburgley Mansion. She had claimed it was because she was already writing to Jack out west, so there was no chance of romance between them. And Addie could see that perhaps the same applied between her and Jacob. They had shared this strange interlude, the journey between leaving New York and arriving in Rocky River, where they both were hoping for a better future. Being thrown into each other's company, looking after Nathan had given them a sense of camaraderie, with no expectation of anything more. One of the things which endeared him to Addie was how down-to-earth he had been about her hand when she had discreetly removed the bandages to apply more of the salve to her wounds. When she had explained that the doctor had told her she might never regain proper use of her hand and that it might look scarred, he had responded with compassion, not pity. If anything, he had insisted imperfection was just part of everyday life, which had gone a long way to reassure her about how Mr. Sanford might react when they met. The stagecoach bumped over a particularly rough piece of ground, and Jacob's eyes opened. He yawned and stretched, running a hand through his hair. "I really don't know how I can ever thank you for being such a savior with Nathan on this journey," he said. "I'm not sure how I would have managed without you, if I'm honest. You have a magic touch when it comes to getting him to sleep." Addie felt herself blush. He had thanked her so many times, but in truth, she was grateful to be able to help, as it took her mind off feeling nervous about her upcoming wedding. "I used to enjoy looking after the little ones in the orphanage," she said with a shrug. She leaned down and pulled a cheese roll from her basket, passing it across to him. "You could probably use some breakfast, huh? Nathan has already had some bread, so he's perfectly content for the time being." Jacob devoured the food hungrily. They had been able to buy a few supplies for the journey in Hudsonville, but she would enjoy being able to sit at a table and have a proper meal soon. "Are you looking forward to starting work?" she asked. "Is there already an apothecary in Rocky River, or will you be the first one?" They had been so busy caring for Nathan during the journey that Jacob had not told her very much about what he would be doing when they arrived. She found herself wanting to try and picture him in his new surroundings, and even wondered whether she would be able to call in and see Nathan if she was in town on an outing from the ranch. She wasn't sure whether Andrew would think it appropriate for them to remain friends. "To be honest, I'm not exactly sure," he said with a wry smile. "I'm not a trained doctor, but I used to work assisting a doctor with returning soldiers from the Indian Wars. I guess I just kind of fell into it and had an aptitude for that sort of work. The doctor I used to work alongside encouraged me to study from all his books and taught me a lot himself as well." "What made you decide to leave that position?" She felt she knew Jacob well enough now that he wouldn't mind her asking. He finished the roll and took a gulp of water. "When my sister wrote to tell me she was marrying George, I wasn't sure what to think about it at first," he said slowly. "Sandra was older than me, you see, and took care of me after our parents died. She was always rather shy, and looking back, I can see that she used to put me first, which makes me feel a little guilty. George seemed very attentive to her when they first started courting, but I had heard a few rumors that he was a womanizer and partial to drinking at the saloon. Not the sort of man my pa would have wanted her to marry, I'm sure. Perhaps I should have discouraged it," he mused. "But then she might not have wanted you to interfere," Addie said. "You're not to blame for who she fell in love with. I know from my own experience that having no parents means you don't have that loving guidance anymore. And you were busy with work, I guess. It's not hard to be taken in by someone's charm and then realize too late that they might not necessarily be who they seem." Jacob shot her a quizzical look, but she didn't want to reveal anything about the way Frederick Jephson had behaved toward her. The thought of it still made her shudder, and it was something she wanted to put behind her. "I suppose I was just happy that Sandra had found someone who wanted to marry her. I was always busy working away with the soldiers, and I used to worry about her feeling lonely. She never said too much in her letters, but I sensed that after she told George they were having a baby, he changed. I found out afterward that he had lavished his attention on her because he was idle and wanted someone to wait on him hand and foot. But he never really had any intention of supporting a family. He left her in the lurch and took up with a woman he met at the saloon. Poor Sandra was left with the humiliation of her husband abandoning her and having no help once she had Nathan. I feel bad that I was so busy with my own work that I never knew about all of this until it was too late. Sandra was determined to keep it from me because she didn't want to burden me with her worries. She sounds like a very kind and caring person," Addie said. "And now you are being equally as kind and caring, looking after Nathan." "I guess so," Jacob replied. "I was becoming disillusioned with everything to do with the Indian Wars. All that senseless killing over scraps of land which really belonged to the Indians. When I came home on leave, the doctor told me that Sandra had never really recovered after giving birth to little Nathan. She suffered from a terrible infection, and the doctor couldn't save her life. I'm just grateful we were able to spend some time together during her last days. And that's why I can never turn my back on Nathan because I owe her so much." Addie looked down tenderly at the boy in her arms. He might have had a tragic start in life, but she knew Jacob would take good care of him and love him like a son. "From what Mr. Sanford told me in his letters about Rocky River and Wyoming, it sounds like a nice place to raise a family," Addie said. "In some ways, it's perhaps a blessing that Nathan probably won't remember his ma when he's older. He'll only know what it's like having you taking care of him, and you're doing a wonderful job of it." "You're too kind," Jacob chuckled. "I still have plenty to learn, I know." "I'm sure you'll meet plenty of folks working as the town's apothecary, too," Addie said. She had a sudden image of elegant ladies calling in for remedies and being drawn to Jacob's kind-hearted demeanor, and was surprised at the sudden pang of what could only be called envy at the thought of another woman tending to Nathan under Jacob's warm-eyed gaze. "I'll have a family of my own soon enough," she reminded herself inwardly. "It's Andrew who will be by my side as a father to our children. Jacob is just a good friend." You're right about Wyoming being a good place to raise a family. That's what the doctor I used to work with said to me when I was thinking about what to do for the best. He knew Dr. Mundy in Rocky River was looking for an assistant because the town is growing so fast that it was too much for him to manage, and suggested I should write to him. After Sandra died, there was nothing to keep me back east. So we exchanged a couple of letters, and he was keen for me to start as soon as possible. It sounds like just what you need, and I expect the job will be a pleasant relief after ministering to soldiers. Exactly. The best part is that Dr. Mundy said that having Nathan with me would not be a problem in the slightest. I'm sure you'll find a nice young woman to marry soon enough, and Nathan will grow up in a loving family. Your sister would be very proud of you, I'm sure. A shadow flitted across Jacob's face, giving him an expression that was hard to read. Was it disappointment, she wondered? Perhaps she wasn't the only one finding the thought of traveling hundreds of miles for a new beginning a bit daunting. Would you like me to take him from you now? Jacob switched sides and sat on the seat next to her so he could take the baby from her arms. But just as she was passing Nathan to him, the stagecoach lurched into a rut again. Throwing them together, his arm shot out around her shoulders to stop her from tumbling forward, and Addie found herself looking up into his warm brown eyes. "I'm sorry," she muttered. Her cheeks flushed at his close proximity, and he withdrew his arm hastily. No, it's me who should be apologizing. I did it without thinking, just to make sure Nathan was all right. Nathan stirred in her arms, but seemed none the worse for the disturbance, and Addie passed the baby across to him, feeling disappointed in herself. I guess my balance still isn't very good because of not being able to move my damaged arm as quickly as I used to be able to. I'm sorry. I hope you don't think I was being careless. Careless? Quite the opposite. I've never met a more caring woman, Jacob replied. He nodded at her hand. I saw plenty of injuries far worse than that in the soldiers, Addie. You'll be surprised how well a body can heal, given a bit of time. I've seen how you hold Nathan so easily, and I think you'll be able to do more than the doctor said when it first happened. Addie's spirits lifted. His matter-of-fact words meant a lot. And it was the first time she had felt a real sense of hope about her injury. A sudden thumping on the roof of the stagecoach interrupted them. "Rocky River up ahead," the coach driver yelled. "If you want to freshen up, now's the time to do it," he added, chuckling at his own joke as there was nowhere to do so. Addie's heart started thumping faster under her dress as she noticed they were already on the outskirts of Rocky River. She patted her hair, wishing she had a mirror to see how she looked and the chance to wash her face. She had hastily sent a telegraph from New York telling Andrew which day she hoped to arrive, but all her doubts about not having received a letter back from him came flooding back now that they were almost there. "You look a picture of loveliness," Jacob said, with an amused smile, passing her bonnet to her. "Whereas I know I probably look like I've been sleeping under a hedge. I just hope Dr. Mundy won't think my crumpled clothes and disheveled state are indicative of a messy mind. I like everything to be nice and orderly at work." "Of course he won't," Addie replied with a smile to match his own. "The town looks just how I imagined." She peered out at the wooden boardwalk, an array of businesses dotted along the main street. "Look at the mountains beyond, and the river. It's so beautiful." "Do you think you'll be coming into Rocky River at all?" Jacob asked casually. "It would be nice to meet your husband and know that you've settled into your new life at the ranch if you happen to be passing." "I'd like that very much, too," Addie murmured. The driver reined the horses to a stop near the mercantile store, and she heard their harnesses jingling as a young boy ran out to hold them while he climbed down. "Thank you for giving me so much help with Nathan. You've been wonderful." "It was a pleasure having your company on the journey." They both spoke over each other, and Addie felt her cheeks turning pink again at the sense of closeness that had grown between them, especially within the stagecoach. The driver flung the door open and stuck his head in, breaking the moment. "All ready to disembark?" he cried. "I don't see anyone waiting to meet you, but I guess they'll be along soon enough. The doctor has probably been called out to visit an ailing patient on one of the ranches. He's a busy man," he added, looking down the street. Addie felt flustered as she climbed out and brushed the creases out of her dress. She had hoped that Andrew would be waiting there with a welcoming smile, but she couldn't see anyone matching his description. A group of elderly ladies bustled toward the mercantile, discussing what they needed to buy, and once they had entered, she saw a man and woman standing nearby, having what looked like a heated argument. "I was going to tell you, but you've just been so busy I didn't get a chance. I've had enough of your meddling ways, Julia. This time you've gone too far. I only wanted to help. What am I going to do about it now?" The words drifted toward Addie, and Jacob pulled a face as he caught her eye. "I thought folks were meant to be friendly out here," he said. Suddenly, the woman turned and ran toward her. "Are you Adeline Webb?" she asked breathlessly. Addie nodded. "Yes, I'm Miss Webb. May I ask who you are?" The man who had had his back to her up until now turned around and strode toward them, looking as though he was attempting to conceal his anger with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This is my sister, Julia." He jerked his head toward the woman who had run up to her. "I'm Andrew Sanford, and I'm afraid there's been a terrible mix-up. You're not the woman I'm supposed to be marrying." Chapter 9. Rocky River, Wyoming, 1881. "I don't know what you mean," Addie stuttered. She felt as though there was a heavy weight pressed on her chest, and she could barely catch her breath. She bent down and pulled the bundle of letters from her carpet bag that was still tied in a pink ribbon. "I have all these letters from you, including your last one where you proposed to me." She noticed Andrew staring down at her bandaged hand, and her heart sank. Everything she had feared most seemed to be coming true. She felt the heat flood her cheeks and knew that she had to explain. "I was in an accident at my last place of employment. I was trying to save Elliot Jephson, my employer's son, from being hit by a coach and horses when his ball rolled out into the street." She looked up into his face and saw confusion. "I wrote you a letter telling you all about it because I wanted to be honest and not come here under false pretenses. I know you said it was important that a wife would be able to work alongside you on the ranch, so I thought it was only fair to give you the option to withdraw your proposal if you thought my injury would hinder me from working with you on the ranch." Andrew harumphed. "Well, sure. I think only having one useful hand would certainly stop you from being able to work on the ranch or keep house." He scratched his head and looked down at the bandages again. "Although, to be honest, I think that's the least of our worries." "Did you not receive that letter?" Addie replied. She felt as though she was clutching at straws and that things were going from bad to worse. "I didn't plan to travel out here until receiving your reply, but I had another troubling incident at Warburgley Mansion, and Mr. Jephson insisted I should leave immediately. He gave me the money to travel west." The old ladies came back out of the mercantile, glancing curiously in their direction, and Addie paused until they had wandered further along the street. The last thing she wanted was for everyone in her new hometown to know what a fool she had been. "I sent a telegraph message as well from New York before boarding the train. I assumed that because you didn't write back and tell me not to come, you still wanted to marry me." Her voice trembled with emotion as she realized that everything she had been looking forward to was in jeopardy. To her dismay, hot tears of shame rolled down her cheeks, and she hung her head, not wanting to see the pity and dismay in Andrew's eyes for a minute longer. Across the street, she could see people nudging and whispering as they stared at her, which only made it worse. A moment later, she felt a comforting hand on her arm. She wiped her tears away with a handkerchief and looked up to see Jacob standing next to her with worry etched on his face. "I can't believe you're treating Miss Webb so badly," Jacob said, giving Andrew and Julia a hard stare. "Do you have any idea what she has gone through? She put her own life in danger to save the little boy of the family she used to work for, and she has traveled here in good faith, expecting to marry you. Yet here you are, telling her that she is not the right woman." "What you are saying makes no sense," he added angrily. Addie shot him a grateful smile, and her heart felt heavy at the thought of him not being there to defend her in the future. Jacob had proven himself to be a true and loyal friend at a time when she most needed one. Julia Sanford stepped forward and gently patted Addie's arm. "I think I owe everyone an explanation," she said, looking nervous. "You don't say," Andrew muttered sarcastically. "I'm as much in the dark about this as Miss Webb and her traveling companion, Julia. Why don't you tell us all what you've been doing?" Julia looked down at the toes of her dusty boots, where they peeked out from under her calico dress for a moment, and then took a deep breath. "Do you remember that conversation we had about you deciding it was time to get married?" she said, glancing at her brother. After he had nodded, she continued, "I know what you're like, and even though you said you wanted to get married, I figured you probably wouldn't do anything about it. So I decided to take matters into my own hands and help you." "I don't need your help," Andrew replied with a weary sigh. "I'm a grown man, quite capable of finding a wife for myself." "Well, I went to Mrs. Devereaux's matrimonial agency in town and placed an advertisement. I thought that if you had some replies, you would be able to start writing to the lady who sounded best." "You never said anything?" When Miss Webb replied, "You were so busy working away on the neighboring ranch after that fire that they had. I didn't want to bother you with it." She had the grace to look embarrassed as her brother shook his head with annoyance. "Really? A quick conversation would have been enough." "Oh, okay," Julia exclaimed, throwing her hands up in the air. "I know it was wrong, but I did it with good intentions. I wrote the letters to Miss Webb, pretending to be you," she mumbled guiltily. Addie gasped at this revelation. "So all of the letters were from you? Why would you do such a thing and deceive us both like this?" "I know. I should have told Andrew and let him write to you himself, but you sounded so perfect for him, and I was worried that he would dismiss the idea of marrying you." She fiddled with the fringe on the edge of her shawl. "If it makes things any better, I know my brother inside out, and everything I said in the letters is how he thinks and feels, I'm sure." Addie's head started spinning at the thought that everything she had believed was real between her and Andrew for all these months was in fact a fabrication. "But why did you say that Addie is not the person you should be marrying?" Jacob demanded, glaring at Andrew. "It sounds as though you're expecting to marry someone else, not that you didn't realize what your sister was doing." Nathan stirred in his arms, disturbed by the tension that crackled in the air, and Addie stood next to Jacob and stroked the little boy's cheek until he settled again, wishing that none of this mess was happening. This time, it was Andrew's turn to look apologetic. "Julia is right. We did have a conversation about me getting married, but I promise I never realized that she was going to place an advertisement or write to you without me knowing." He thrust his hands into his pockets and shook his head awkwardly. "The thing is, it was my neighbor, Henry, who put the idea of having a mail-order bride into my head. But I didn't want everyone in Rocky River to know my business. So when I was in Hudsonville fetching supplies for the ranch, I visited the matrimonial agency over there and placed an advertisement." "You never mentioned it," Julia said accusingly, but Andrew ignored her. "I had a couple of replies, and one young lady in particular stood out because she came from a ranching family in the East. I figured Mary would be well suited to life on our ranch, so I started writing to her." "I never saw any letters come for you, though," Julia exclaimed, sounding indignant. "How did you write to each other without me seeing any letters? If I'd seen them, I would have known to stop writing to Miss Webb." "I gave my address as Henry Stewart's ranch, and Mary's letters went there. I just collected them when I went to visit Henry and Chloe." "It seems like you've both been as secretive as each other," Jacob muttered. Andrew shrugged. "I have a large family, and they can be rather inquisitive sometimes," he said, looking at Addie. "I wasn't sure whether sending for a mail-order bride would work out, and I didn't want them speculating about it until I knew whether I had found a suitable woman to ask to be my wife." Addie nodded slowly and gave him a tentative smile as she began to understand what had happened. "This lady, Mary, who comes from a ranching background, she sounds like she would be perfect to be your wife." "I guess so," Andrew said quietly. "That's why I sent her a proposal recently. She should be receiving it right about now. I have never been on a ranch in my life, but I had hoped that it wouldn't matter." Addie glanced toward Julia. "Your replies certainly explained that it would be hard work, but that has never bothered me. At least, not until my accident. So what happens now? Jacob asked. You can't just leave Miss Webb to fend for herself in a strange town hundreds of miles from home. I'm not sure, Andrew said. Is it really our responsibility if Miss Webb came out knowing that she wouldn't be able to work properly on the ranch, even though Julia, as me, said it was important? Only having the use of one hand is a pretty big impediment, regardless of the mix-up between Julia and me. You've said quite enough, Jacob said, stepping closer to Andrew. The two men eyed each other warily, and Addie saw a new side to Jacob as he put Andrew in his place. You won't meet a woman with a kinder heart and willingness to help, and if you think you can bully her into leaving, you'll have me to deal with, Mr. Sanford. Her hand will mend soon enough, but I'm not sure you can say the same about your manners. I don't know who you are, but I think this is a matter for us to sort out, Andrew shot back. He scowled as Nathan started crying. I'm sure we can figure something out, Julia said hastily, looking between the two men. We don't want the baby to get upset. She jabbed Andrew with her elbow, and he stepped away, looking disinterested. Addie picked up her carpet bag and lifted her chin, determined to try and take back some control of the situation before it became even worse. If you could tell me where the nearest boarding house is, I'll stay there while I decide what to do next. Are you sure? Jacob said. He looked upset on her behalf, and for one brief moment, Addie thought he was about to suggest something different. What about, you must be Jacob Muswell, a loud voice cried. Addie spun around to see a cheerful-looking gentleman in a black suit sitting in a small buggy behind them. He lifted his hat. Good day to you. I'm Dr. Mundy. Hop in, Jacob. We have a patient who needs urgent care, so there's no time to waste. You can bring the baby with you. He'll cheer old Mrs. Smith up, no end, and I'll take you to your new home afterward. Will you be okay? Jacob asked Addie hastily. He looked torn between staying to help her and doing as the doctor had asked, and she saw a flash of concern cross the doctor's face. Yes, I'll be absolutely fine. Thank you for all your help, and enjoy your new job. Promise you'll let me know where you are? Addie nodded, suddenly feeling too overcome with emotion to speak. She gently touched Nathan's tiny hand one last time and fixed a smile on her face as she watched Jacob climb up next to Dr. Mundy with Nathan still in his arms and wave goodbye. Get along, the doctor cried, sending the horse straight into a fast trot. As the dust kicked up behind the buggy, Addie felt as though her heart was being torn out of her chest, especially when she saw Jacob twist in his seat to give her a final wave. Now she really was all alone. Miss Webb, I might have a solution, Andrew said behind her. We are in need of help around the house, as it's a busy time on the ranch right now. Would you consider doing housekeeping duties in return for a wage and a roof over your head? It's nothing too strenuous, Julia added, clearly wanting to make amends. Just light duties to help our elderly parents is all. Addie hesitated for a moment and then came to a decision, knowing that her money from Mr. Jephson had almost run out. Thank you, that would be a good solution. It's exactly the sort of work I'm used to. Let me carry your bag for you. Andrew held out his hand, and she passed it across. It seemed like some sort of truce had been reached, which she was glad about. Our wagon is just up the street. I think you'll like Rocky River. It's a nice town. Won't your fiancé be upset about me being in the house when she arrives? Addie asked as they walked. I'll have to think what to do about that, Andrew said cryptically. He shot Julia a dark look, and she looked away, not meeting his eye. I won't say anything or interfere, Andrew, I promise. Chapter 10. Addie straightened up from pumping water into the bucket and gazed around at her new surroundings while she caught her breath. The Sanford ranch was bigger than she had expected, and there were rolling pastures, as far as she could see, dotted with contented cattle grazing the lush grass. The sprawling homestead was plenty big enough for the extended family. Julia and Andrew, who were both still unmarried, lived in the main log cabin with their elderly parents. There were also 3 other log cabins on the property, where Andrew's 3 brothers lived with their wives and children. From what she could gather, there were also various uncles and cousins ranching in the district. What a difference a few weeks have made, she thought, smiling to herself. It was late morning, and she would have been busy washing a mountain of dishes in the scullery if she had still been in New York. It was hard to believe that 2 weeks had already flown by since her fateful arrival in Rocky River, but she was slowly settling into her new routine. Julia was delighted with how things were going and had quickly encouraged Addie to make herself at home in the kitchen. Every day she cooked up enormous stews for the family and ranch hands and baked fresh bread. The large kitchen garden provided all the fruit and vegetables she needed to cook with, and there was a plentiful supply of beef from their own animals. "Do you need my help to carry that?" Andrew asked, strolling around the corner from the barn. He lifted his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow and reached for the bucket anyway. "I can manage perfectly well if you're busy." Addie still felt self-conscious about the scarring on her arm and hand, but she no longer needed to keep it bandaged, which was one thing she was grateful for. "I'm just doing the chickens, and then I'll start cooking. It's roast beef with potatoes and vegetables for dinner tonight, followed by apple pie. Your pa says that's his favorite meal." "Uh-huh, it sure is," Andrews said with a look of amusement. "He's very happy that you're here looking after them so well. Don't say I told you this, but Julia is not a very patient cook. She's always been a tomboy and prefers working outside on the ranch with me," he added with a chuckle. "I'd better get going," Addie said once they reached the chicken coop. She scattered some corn on the ground, and the chickens came running, clucking with excitement. She would collect the eggs and bake some cakes that afternoon as well, she decided. "I'll see you later then," Andrew said, striding away. She could tell he was already thinking about the next job that needed doing. Addie watched him go and couldn't help but feel wistful about what might have been. Although she was grateful for her position as a housekeeper and it afforded her some security, she knew deep in her heart that there was no real connection between her and Andrew. At least not in the sense that she had hoped for in a potential husband. She tipped the bucket of water into the trough for the chickens with a sigh. "Perhaps I am destined never to be married? Maybe it's not such a bad thing," she thought to herself. She sighed again, knowing that she was kidding herself. If anything, seeing the easy manner between Andrew and his many nephews and nieces who lived on the ranch only made her yearn even more for a family of her own. She looked around the ranch again, wishing she knew what the answer was. "Dear Lord, thank you for bringing me on this journey out west. If it is your wish for me to remain single, I will do my best to accept that it is part of your great plan. I know that I am blessed in so many other ways, but if you could find a way to show me how I could have a family of my own, I would be eternally grateful." The prayer drifted through her mind, giving her some comfort, and she smiled at the chickens jostling around her feet as she picked out the eggs from the coop and put them in her apron. Old Mr. Sanford had a sweet tooth, and she knew he would enjoy a slice of sponge cake and strawberry preserve with his afternoon cup of tea. As she bustled around the kitchen doing her chores, Addie's thoughts often turned toward Jacob and Nathan. Have they settled in? Did Jacob manage to find someone to look after Nathan? The questions buzzed around her mind like wasps, leaving her feeling unsettled again. Missing Nathan in her arms felt like a physical ache, and she hoped that whoever Jacob found would care for the little boy with the love and attention he deserved. She missed his sweet baby smell, the little whorl of hair on the top of his head, and the way his fingers clung on so tightly to her own. Maybe she could ask to join Julia next time she went into town for supplies, so she could visit the apothecary and find out more. Andrew seemed on edge over dinner that night. Although he was not a talkative man, he usually liked to share tidbits of news from the ranch with his parents. "What's gotten into you today?" Julia asked as she scooped up her last mouthful of apple pie. "Are you worried about the cattle sale next week?" she asked. "No, it's not that," Andrew said. He glanced in Addie's direction, and she wondered what he was thinking. "Shall I make coffee for everyone?" Addie suggested. She stood up and started gathering the dirty dishes to wash up. "Perhaps you would like to take it into your study if you need to do the books, Andrew?" He stood up and shook his head. "Will you take a walk outside with me for a moment, please, Adeline?" he asked, sounding suddenly rather formal. Julia shot him a curious look. How about I clear the table so that you can go out now? It's a nice evening for a walk." Addie felt flustered as she straightened her apron and followed Andrew outside onto the veranda. His serious tone brought the memories of being reprimanded by Mr. Jephson flooding back, and it was unsettling. She thought she had left that sort of thing in her past. "Have I done something wrong?" She couldn't help but blurt out the question. Andrew sat in one of the rocking chairs and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, looking out across the ranch with an inscrutable expression. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows. "I feel bad about everything that happened with Julia writing to you pretending to be me," he said eventually. His voice was low and sounded regretful. It was not the answer Addie had been expecting, and she found herself wanting to reassure him. "I thought about it, and I can see now that her intentions were kind. Julia only did it because she cares so much for you and wants to see you happy." "You are a very generous person to come to that conclusion," Andrew said, giving her a sideways look. "Most women would quite rightfully have been very upset, but you seem to take it all in your stride." Addie thought about how she had cried herself to sleep during her first few nights at the ranch, but decided to keep that fact private. "When I worked for the Jephson family, I had to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I have no family to help me out, and I learned the hard way how to tell the difference between folks who behave with good intentions and those who only selfishly think of their own needs." "It sounds like you were badly treated by someone," Andrew ventured. "That's all in the past," Addie said lightly. "What I mean is that now I've been at the ranch for a couple of weeks. I can see that your family is nothing like the Jephsons, and that you all look out for each other. Julie meant no harm by writing to me." Andrew sat up straighter in his chair and turned to face her. "I've been trying to think of a way to make amends for what happened. I know enough gentlemen in this area who have sent for a mail-order bride only for it to go horribly wrong. I appreciate that it's difficult for a single woman like you to travel so far, only to discover that things weren't what they seemed. It must have come as a shock." "You could say that, but I enjoy being the housekeeper here." Addie tried to sound philosophical about it. She hoped that he would not be able to sense her sadness about her dream of marrying and having a family turning to dust. "Mary accepted my proposal," Andrews said hesitantly, "but I haven't replied to her letter or sent the money for her to travel west yet." "What's stopping you?" "I've decided that the only way I can make it up to you is to write back to Mary and tell her that our marriage is off. I'm sure you and I would get along just fine if we got married, don't you think?" Addie could not hide the shock that she felt at his suggestion. In all her prayers and musings about what had happened, it had not occurred to her that Andrew would make an offer like this to her. For one dizzying moment, she felt tempted to agree. "I'll be Andrew's wife just like I hoped, and part of this big happy family." The thought was practically irresistible. But then she remembered that the letters she had read, which had been the basis of her affection toward him, were not from him at all. And even though Andrew had been polite to her since she had arrived at the ranch, there was something missing when they were together. She couldn't put her finger on what it was, but there was no spark of easy friendship. "Not like Jacob and I had." The thought snuck up on her, leaving her surprised. "What about the fact that I have no experience of ranch life?" she asked. "Mary sounded perfect for you." She watched Andrew closely and saw regret cloud his eyes. It was everything she needed to know. She reached across and laid her hand on top of his, giving it an affectionate squeeze. "You might not realize it, but I think I can see that you are already in love with Mary. It would be wrong of me to stand in the way of your marriage to her, even though your suggestion is very kind." "Are you sure?" Andrew asked. His voice was bright with hope and longing, and she knew she had done the right thing. "I am sure, and I wish you both every happiness. How about you go inside now and write that letter to post tomorrow? I'm sure she can't wait to meet you and join your family." Andrew jumped up and grinned at her. "You're a very special woman, Addie," he said. "One day you're going to make a lucky gentleman a wonderful wife." She sat for a few minutes longer on the rocking chair, looking out across the rolling hills with Rocky River beyond. She needed to make plans for her future, and she realized now that it could not be at the ranch. It would be unfair on Mary for her to remain there, and if she was being honest with herself, she knew that she would find it painful to see them looking so happy together, even though she wished them well. As Addie drifted off to sleep that night, she turned to her faith once more, knowing that God was the one constant in her life. Lord, forgive me for my sins, and thank you for giving me the wisdom to know that Andrew and Mary belong together. By your grace, please help me see the best way forward, whether that is to stay in Rocky River or try my luck somewhere else. Amen. Chapter 11. How are you feeling this morning? Addie asked as she poured a cup of tea for Maud Sanford. She had been worried about Andrew's mother for the last few days. Her complexion was gray, and there was a lingering rattle in her chest that she didn't like the sound of. Maud had struggled with a bout of influenza several months ago. Andrew had told her, and Addie had a sneaking suspicion that the effects were still troubling her. I'm fine, dear. Thank you for asking. Maud's pale blue eyes were watery after another coughing fit. Perhaps we should see about getting the doctor out to check you over, Addie suggested gently. Maud waved the suggestion away. I don't want to make a fuss. I know everyone is busy on the ranch at the moment, with the cattle sale coming up soon. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. Angus Sanford hobbled into the room. Is she telling you not to make a fuss? He asked, giving his wife a fond look from under his bushy eyebrows. You were coughing all night, Maud. If Addie thinks it's a good idea for you to see the doctor, I'm inclined to agree. Julia bustled into the kitchen with an armful of folded sheets that she had just gotten in from the washing line. What's this I hear about fetching the doctor? Addie thinks it might be a good idea, but I don't want to make a fuss. Julia dumped the sheets on the table and pressed the back of her hand to Maud's forehead. I think Addie is quite right to be worried. It feels like you're running a temperature, Ma, and we don't want things to get worse. You know how exhausted you were when you had influenza. She shot Addie a grateful smile. I was already thinking of going into town to fetch some supplies this morning, so I will call in at Dr. Mundy's and ask him if he can call by later on today if he's not too busy. Addie busied herself with preparing the vegetables for lunch. Part of her wanted to ask Julia if she could join her on the trip to Rocky River, but there was too much to do. The neighboring ranch hands were coming over to help brand the cattle ahead of the sale, and they would all need a hearty lunch. Is there anything you would like from town? Julia asked her a little while later. She tied her bonnet under her chin and pulled her gloves on. Would you mind delivering a note to Mr. Muswell at the apothecary? He's the gentleman I befriended on the journey out west, and I was wondering how he's getting on looking after his nephew. Of course, the apothecary is just up the street from where Dr. Mundy lives, so I'll be passing anyway. Perhaps Mr. Muswell will be looking for a wife soon? She added with a mischievous smile. Addie shrugged as though it was of no consequence. He did mention that he hoped to find a wife so that Nathan would have a ma. I'm sure he won't be short of offers from the ladies in town. I see, Julie said slowly, raising her eyebrows. Don't go getting any ideas. I think your matchmaking days are over, Julia. Jacob and I are just good friends. There's nothing more to it. Addie pulled a note from her apron pocket that she had written earlier and passed it over to her. If you can just leave this at the apothecary, I would be very grateful. Maud was suddenly convulsed by a new coughing fit, and Julia stuffed the note into her dress pocket, her brow creasing with worry. The doctor said that Ma was lucky to survive when she had influenza, she said in a low voice to Addie. I hope he will be able to visit today. We couldn't bear to lose Ma so soon. Addie patted Julia's shoulder and handed her the leather satchel she was taking to put her supplies in. Don't worry about your Ma. I'll be sure to stay inside today and keep an eye on her so she doesn't overdo it. I expect she just needs a tonic from the doctor and perhaps some more rest. I'll make a chicken broth for her as well. Thank you, Addie. You have a generous heart, and we'll miss you if you leave. The next few hours passed by in a whirl of cooking and cleaning as Addie went about her chores. She was glad of the distraction, though, because it stopped her from worrying about her future. Andrew had mailed the train fare money to Mary after their conversation on the veranda, as she had suggested, and Mary was arriving in Rocky River at the end of the week. Although Andrew had told her that she could remain as their housekeeper for as long as she wished, Addie sensed that behind his words, he also felt a little uncomfortable about how Mary would feel if Addie were still at the ranch. How would I feel if I had to see another woman about the house every day who had come west believing she was meant to marry my husband? The thought had kept Addie awake the last few nights, and she didn't want Mary's arrival at the ranch to involve any deception. It wouldn't be fair on her or Andrew, which was why she felt a mounting sense of urgency about needing to leave before Mary arrived. Addie had just finished serving the ranch hands their beef stew and cornbread on a long table in the barn when she heard Julia returning from town. "Did you manage to see the doctor?" she asked, hurrying into the yard as Julie dismounted and started to untack her horse. Julia nodded. "Luckily, I caught him just as he was heading out to visit a patient on the other side of Rocky River. He promised he would come straight here as soon as he finishes. It's a cowboy who might have broken his leg, so it could take a while, but at least we know that Ma will be seen as soon as possible." "Maud's cough doesn't sound as though it has gotten any worse since you left," Addie replied. "She was talking about going outside to do some gardening, but I persuaded her to wait until after the doctor has checked her over." "You did well," Julia said with a wry smile. "Ma can be pretty strong-willed when she gets an idea in her head." She brushed the horse down and turned him out into the field. "Hold up a minute," Julie cried, running after Addie a moment later. "I have some news that you might be interested in." Addie paused on the veranda steps, and her heart lifted with excitement. It could only be news about Jacob. "I bumped into Mrs. Devereaux when I was in town," Julia said, following her into the house. Addie was momentarily thrown. "Mrs. Devereaux? You mean the lady from the matrimonial agency?" "Uh-huh." Julia grinned at her. "I hope you don't mind, but I still feel bad about writing those letters to you pretending to be Andrew. And I know you're probably worried about your position here when Mary arrives in a couple of days." "It has been on my mind," Addie admitted. "I got talking to Mrs. Devereaux, and she mentioned that one of the gentlemen on her books has decided to move a couple of hours away from Rocky River to run a hotel. It's a busy frontier town, and he needs someone to help care for his 2 young children while he is working." "So, are you saying he needs a housekeeper or a wife?" "Mrs. Devereaux knows Mr. Watson personally and can vouch for him, being a kind-hearted and generous man," Julia continued. "He was widowed last year, and he wants a fresh start. He's only 28, and I figured it might be perfect for you. His ma lives with them as well, so Mrs. Devereaux suggested you might like to find out more." She hinted that although the position is to care for his children, initially what he really wants is to get married. "How would I even know what he's like?" Addie replied. "I can't risk making another mistake." Julia unpacked her supplies, not saying anything for a moment, but her cheeks had turned slightly pink. "Did you already say to Mrs. Devereaux that I was interested?" Addie didn't know whether to be cross or amused, as Julia's cheeks turned a darker shade of pink. "You are incorrigible, Julia. You love nothing more than matchmaking. But look at the mess it caused last time. I think he would be perfect for you," Julia said, looking guilty. "Mrs. Devereaux said that she would be delighted to chaperone a meeting between the 2 of you tomorrow if you would like to consider it. Apparently, he's traveling at the end of the week, so there's no time to lose." Addie's first instinct was to say no, but then she thought about Mary's upcoming arrival at the ranch. She felt as though she had no choice, so she nodded, and Julia flung her arms around her, giving her a hug. "You won't regret it," Julia cried. "I have a good feeling about this." "Did you manage to give Jacob Muswell my note?" Addie asked as she put the coffee pot on the range to warm. "The note?" Julie looked puzzled for a moment and then rolled her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Addie. It completely slipped my mind, what with having to rush to find the doctor for Ma. I'll take it next time I go into town instead, if that's okay." Before Addie had a chance to feel disappointed, the sound of a horse galloping up the drive interrupted them. She hurried to the door and peered out, relieved to see that it was Dr. Mundy already. He strode into the cabin a moment later, carrying his leather bag of medicines. "How is my favorite patient?" he cried jovially when he saw Maud sitting in her chair next to the fire. "Julia told me that your cough has come back again. I've made up a tonic for you, which I think will be a great help. But above all, you must listen to your family when they tell you not to do too much." Maud looked offended. "I don't know what you mean, doctor. I can't just spend all day sitting around being idle, not when there's a ranch to run." Julie caught the doctor's eye, and they laughed. "I think you're on the mend already, Ma." The doctor's visit was a great success, and Addie felt happier about the possibility of leaving, knowing that Maud would soon be well again. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee before you go to your next call?" Addie asked as he packed his stethoscope away. "That would be grand. I didn't have time for lunch." Addie took a tray with coffee and a slice of cake outside to the veranda, where Dr. Mundy was admiring the view. She wanted to ask how Jacob was doing, but suddenly felt hesitant, thinking that he might think she was being impertinent. "This is a fine ranch. Maud and Angus worked hard to make it what it is, and the next generation is continuing the tradition." He took a large bite out of the cake and chewed it with relish. "I expect you might be wondering how Jacob is settling into his new job," he said, giving Addie a shrewd glance. "I understand you befriended him on the train. Is he enjoying the role? How about baby Nathan? He is such a delightful little boy, but Mr. Muswell was a little bit worried about how he would manage to look after him with his new job." The doctor took a gulp of coffee and nodded. "He's settling into the new job just fine, but I knew that he would after we wrote to each other a couple of times. He's just the sort of man we need in Rocky River to help me out when I'm busy. The townsfolk have warmed to him as well. He's a good apothecary, and folks are already flocking to him for advice." Addie smiled, feeling genuinely happy to hear this news. She wanted Jacob to enjoy his new life after going through so much heartache over his sister. "The young ladies of town have certainly taken to him," Dr. Mundy added with a twinkle in his eye. "I've never seen so many calling into the apothecary for a chat about their ailments. I doubt it will be long until he gets married. He already has a kind-hearted neighbor, Miss Raleigh, taking care of Nathan when he's busy. Apparently, the little boy adores her." "That's good to hear," Addie said quietly. She pictured an elegant woman with Nathan in her arms and Jacob looking fondly at them both. Perhaps they were already courting. She wanted to feel pleased for him, but couldn't help feeling a pang of sadness as well. There had been several times on the train when she'd sensed their friendship could become more under different circumstances. But now she realized she'd been deluding herself. "Well, I'd better be on my way," Dr. Mundy said, rising to his feet. He drained the last mouthful of coffee and put his hat on. "I'm headed out of town for the night to see some of my patients who live further away. Make sure Maud takes the tonic, and she should make a full recovery." As the doctor rode off with a cheery wave, Addie spent a few moments sweeping the veranda and thinking about what he had told her. It looked like Jacob had his future all planned out, including a charming young woman to care for Nathan, who would likely become his wife. And no doubt Andrew and Mary would get married at the earliest opportunity. "Didn't I ask the Lord for a sign about my future?" she thought to herself. "Perhaps this is it." She came to a sudden decision. She would go into town and meet the gentleman Mrs. Devereux had suggested with an open mind. Perhaps it was fate that Julia had returned with news of a kind-hearted man looking for a wife. Addie knew that she could not stay in Rocky River any longer. She had to put her faith in the Lord and pray that meeting this new gentleman really would give her the new start she hoped for. Chapter 12. Jacob looked around his workplace with a sense of achievement. The sun was shining through the vessels of colored tinctures and tonics in the window, casting a rainbow onto the wooden floor, and after his first few weeks of getting accustomed to the place, he knew he finally had it how he wanted. Everything was tidy, so he could put his hand on what he needed at a moment's notice, which gave him a feeling of quiet satisfaction. He wanted Dr. Mundy to feel he'd made the right decision in asking him to come to Rocky River. At least one part of my life is orderly and organized, he thought to himself. He peered out of the window, glancing up and down the street. He was starting to recognize quite a few of the townsfolk, but he still hadn't seen the one person he hoped to glimpse. Every time the bell on the door tinkled to announce a new customer, he looked up, hoping to see Addie's blue eyes looking back at him. But despite promising to stay in touch, she hadn't visited yet. She'll be busy settling into her new life out on the ranch. Each day that passed without seeing her only added to his disappointment, no matter how busy he tried to keep himself. He'd overheard one of Andrew Sanford's cousins in the mercantile store one day, gossiping about the new housekeeper working out at the family ranch, and could only assume that's what Addie was doing while they tried to sort out the confusion of who Andrew would marry. "Perhaps Dr. Mundy can tell me more," he muttered to himself. Two attractive ladies walked past and waved coyly at him through the window. He nodded an acknowledgement in return, hoping it wouldn't encourage them to come in, and sighed with relief as they strolled on toward the park. He knew Dr. Mundy was amused by the fact that a steady trickle of eligible young ladies had been making their way to meet Rocky River's new apothecary since he had taken up his new position. Never had he heard so many details about ailments that supposedly needed his attention, which mysteriously improved after half an hour of chatting with him. But although he was happy to serve them, and more than willing to be polite, his heart was closed to any romantic advances. They just didn't interest him in the way that Addie had. "I saw that you had a lull in customers, so I brought Nathan round to visit," Miss Raleigh said, poking her head through the doorway. "Papa, Papa." Nathan gave Jacob a dimpled smile from Miss Raleigh's arms and kicked his legs with excitement. "Thank you, Edith. I hope he's behaving well for you today?" "He's becoming quite the little chatterbox," Edith Raleigh replied, looking down at him fondly. "Would you like me to make you a pie for dinner tonight?" she asked. Jacob was tempted, but shook his head. It would be all too easy to take advantage of Miss Raleigh's generosity, but he had to get used to living on his own with Nathan. "That's very kind of you, but I already made a stew this morning and left it on the range." "Are you going to go to your pa for a cuddle?" She handed Nathan to Jacob and smiled as he jiggled the baby up and down, making him giggle. "He's such a contented little boy. You're very good with him." Two elderly ladies were hovering outside, and Jacob hastily handed Nathan back. He didn't want anyone to think that he didn't have his mind on the job. "I'll come and fetch him when I've finished for the day," he said, ushering Edith Raleigh out again. "Isn't he a little darling?" the two gray-haired ladies cooed, giving Nathan doting smiles as she passed them before coming into the apothecary. Jacob knew that it was sinful to be full of pride, but when it came to baby Nathan, he felt a warm glow in his heart at their words. Nathan had become a lot more placid over the last few weeks, and Jacob had grown to love him as fiercely as any father would love a son. "He's such a sweet baby," one of the ladies continued. "He has your eyes." "Thank you. That's kind of you to say so." Jacob had discovered that many of the women of Rocky River were delighted to coo and fuss over a baby. The trouble was, with the younger ladies, he was never sure whether they actually liked Nathan or whether they were doing it to endear themselves to him in the hope of courting him, perhaps. "How may I help you today?" he asked. As the two ladies described their ailments, he sent up another silent prayer of thanks that everything had worked out so well with Nathan. After all his worries about how he would manage to care for him and work in his new job, his neighbor, Miss Raleigh, had called around on his very first evening, declaring that she adored babies and would be delighted to look after him whenever he needed. He suspected that Dr. Mundy had something to do with it, but he was grateful nonetheless, and Edith Raleigh had proved to be a real blessing. The rest of the day passed quickly, and Jacob tried not to think about the evening ahead. That was the time he felt most lonesome after he had put Nathan to bed. He read books and wrote up his notes from treating folks, but the small house still felt too empty. He wished he had someone he could sit down with on the veranda to talk about his day and who shared his hopes for the future. Not just someone, he admitted to himself. He wished it was one person in particular, Addie Webb. The The bell tinkled, just as he was cashing up. "I'm closed," he called. "Can you come back in the morning?" He looked up to see that it was Dr. Mundy and shot him an apologetic smile. "Sorry, I wasn't expecting it to be you. Did you manage to see all your patients already?" "I sure did. There were a couple of malingerers who didn't really need my attention, and everything else went quicker than expected. So I figured I may as well come back to town instead of staying out for an extra night. Can I get you a cup of coffee?" Jacob enjoyed spending time with the doctor when he wasn't too busy. Mundy was more than willing to impart his knowledge to Jacob, and he admired the way he knew so much about his patients. His 10 years of being at Rocky River were already proving invaluable in helping Jacob get a feel for the town and the folks who needed his advice. "I guess a quick cup of coffee would be nice," the doctor replied. He stifled a yawn and put his bag down on the floor, sinking wearily into one of the chairs by the counter. Jacob disappeared into the back room, where he had a small stove, and appeared a moment later with 2 mugs of strong coffee. "Here you are." "I didn't tell you. I had to go out to the Sanford ranch yesterday," the doctor said conversationally. "Old Maud Sanford still has a few lingering problems after having influenza a few months ago, but nothing that a few weeks' rest shouldn't fix." "Uh-huh. That's good." Jacob's heart beat a little faster at the mention of the Sanford family. He desperately wanted to ask how Addie was, but decided it would be unprofessional. "Maud told me she was very happy that Andrew's new bride will be arriving in Rocky River in a couple of days on the stagecoach. You know, after that mix-up." Mundy gave Jacob a shrewd look. "Adeline Webb is doing a fine job as their housekeeper. She asked after you and Nathan," he added casually. Jacob felt a strange sensation in his chest. "She did?" Dr. Mundy sighed. "Of course, I could see she was very taken with you, even from those few minutes when the stagecoach dropped you off on your first day here. You should invite her out for a cup of tea or for a walk in the park. She's a charming young woman. She'd make you a wonderful wife," he said. His tone implied that Jacob was overlooking something very obvious. "I hadn't given it much thought." "Listen, Jacob, perhaps it isn't my place to say this, but why be lonesome when there's no need for it? I've never been lucky enough to find the right woman to marry. But if you love Miss Webb, you would be a fool not to tell her." With that, he drained his coffee and put the mug back down on the counter, standing up to go home. "Don't leave it too long either. A pretty young woman like her will soon be courting, I'm sure." Jacob considered the doctor's words as he finished tidying behind the counter, putting various powders away. Did Addie like me in that way? What about Andrew Sanford? Surely she only had thoughts for him? The questions buzzed in his mind, but he had no answers. Suddenly, the doorbell tinkled again, and as if his thoughts had summoned her, his heart flipped as he saw Addie standing hesitantly in the doorway. He rushed forward. "How are you, Addie? I've been thinking about you every day, wondering how you're settling in at the ranch." His words trailed off as he noticed she was carrying her carpet bag. "Hello, Jacob. I wanted to call by to see how you and Nathan are before I leave Rocky River." Chapter 13. "You're leaving?" Jacob gasped. "Where are you going? Are you heading back east?" His breath caught painfully in his throat at the thought of never seeing her again. "Would you like a cup of coffee before you go? Or perhaps you have time for a walk?" He stopped talking, thinking that he probably sounded ridiculous. Addie smiled warmly at him, but he sensed a hint of sadness behind her eyes. "Andrew's fiancée, Mary, is arriving in Rocky River at the end of the week. I figured it would be better for me to have a new start somewhere else. As it happens, Julia bumped into Mrs. Devereaux from the matrimonial agency recently, who suggested a solution. I've decided to travel to a different town further west to take up a post as a nanny caring for someone's children." "Uh-huh. Well, I guess I can see how that would suit you, and it would have been awkward for you to stay at the ranch with Andrew's new wife." Jacob cast around in his mind for something else to say, but there was really only one question on his mind. "The person you will be working for, is it a family?" he blurted out. Addie glanced around the room as though she couldn't quite meet his eye. "No, it's a gentleman who was widowed last year. He's quite pleasant." "A gentleman? I see. His ma will be with him," so it will be perfectly respectable." She hesitated for a moment. "He's taking over the town's hotel and needs someone to help care for his children, and perhaps to become his wife at some point in the future," she added quietly. Jacob felt as though he had been punched in the gut. He wanted to plead with her to stay, but what right did he have? Addie had already been through so much that if she wanted a new start far away from Andrew Sanford, who was he to stand in her way? "That sounds ideal," he croaked, forcing the words out. "You're so good with children. He's a very lucky man, and I hope he knows it." Addie shrugged modestly. "How is baby Nathan? I meant to ask before, but I was so busy at the ranch I didn't come into town." Jacob smiled in spite of himself, feeling on safer ground. "He's doing great. My neighbor, Miss Raleigh, takes care of him when I'm working, which is a real blessing. She even offers to cook for me now and again." "I'm glad to hear it." Addie hitched her carpet bag a little higher on her arm. "Anyhow, I need to go now. Otherwise, I might miss the stagecoach. I'm very happy that everything has worked out for you so well in Rocky River, Jacob," she said. Her expression was guarded, as though Jacob had said something to upset her. "Would you like me to walk you up the street?" Jacob felt tongue-tied, wishing he knew how to recapture the easy sense of camaraderie they had enjoyed on the journey when there was never a shortage of anything to talk about. Panic pulsed in his chest as he recalled Dr. Mundy's advice. "I've missed my chance. I should have said something sooner, but now she's leaving." The thought left him feeling bleak about the future. "Thank you, but no. I think it's best if I just go by myself. I expect Miss Raleigh will be wondering where you are at this time of the evening." Addie gave him a sad smile and let herself out, walking briskly away. Jacob felt the silence settle around him, wondering if there was more he could have said or done to stop her from leaving. "Who was that?" He was surprised to see Miss Raleigh in the doorway with Nathan in her arms. She looked concerned. "That young lady who just left in a hurry." She had tears running down her face. "That's Miss Webb, Addie. We befriended each other on the journey out here. She was such a help with Nathan. She was coming out here to marry Andrew Sanford, but there was a mix-up, and he is marrying someone else. She's leaving Rocky River for a fresh start." Jacob could hear how hollow his voice sounded. "Why was she crying?" "I don't know." Miss Raleigh shook her head, her gray curls bobbing, and opened the door wider. "If I'm not very much mistaken, I think Miss Webb is feeling broken-hearted at the thought of leaving Rocky River." She stepped closer to Jacob and patted his arm. Jacob wondered whether he had misheard. "Broken-hearted? I didn't get the impression that she was in love with Andrew Sanford. In fact, she has been working as their housekeeper these last few weeks, and I think they were on amicable terms." "Not broken-hearted about leaving him," Edith Crawley said patiently. "I meant she seemed broken-hearted about leaving you." Jacob felt as though a tiny flower of hope was unfurling in his heart. "Me? Are you sure?" Miss Raleigh nodded, this time smiling. "More to the point, I reckon you love her too. Why are you letting her leave, Mr. Muswell? You must tell her how you feel before it's too late." Jacob snatched up his coat and pulled it on, suddenly full of energy. "Thank you, Miss Raleigh," he cried. "You're right. I've been a fool." He smacked a kiss on her cheek, leaving her looking startled, and raced through the doorway toward the mercantile, where he could see the stagecoach waiting to leave as the horses fidgeted impatiently. He raced along the street, but at first glance, Jacob couldn't see Addie anywhere. His stomach clenched as he wondered whether he had missed his opportunity, but then he spotted her in the shade of a sycamore tree near the mercantile store. "Addie, wait," he cried. To his relief, she turned around and smiled, hastily wiping away her tears. "There's something I need to tell you." "Yes?" Jacob detected a glimmer of hope in her expression. "I don't want to stop you from leaving if it's what you really want to do, but I haven't been entirely honest with you." Addie looked confused. "What about?" she asked. He reached for her carpet bag and put it on the ground before taking both of her hands in his. "I have to tell you before it's too late. I love you, Addie. I think I've loved you ever since the first time you held Nathan in your arms with such tenderness and compassion." His heart hammered as he searched her face for a clue about her feelings at his bold declaration. "But what about Miss Raleigh?" Addie asked hesitantly. She bit her lip, looking worried. Dr. Mundy told me how wonderful she is with Nathan. I figured she would make a wonderful mother for him and wife for you. Her voice shook with emotion. Miss Raleigh? Jacob felt a wave of relief crash over him. You've gotten the wrong idea, he said with a wry smile. Edith is practically 70 years old. She is wonderful with Nathan, like the grandma he will never know, but not as my wife. I had no idea she was that age. Addie's mouth curved into an apologetic smile. I know how much you wanted a ma for Nathan, so when the doctor mentioned a kind-hearted, unmarried neighbor looking after Nathan for you, I convinced myself that you were already courting her, which is why I knew I couldn't stay in Rocky River. Was it only the thought of someone else looking after Nathan that made you want to leave? Jacob asked. He needed to know, but his mouth was dry. He wondered whether he had misjudged the situation, and she didn't feel anything for him after all. Addie's cheeks flushed pink as she looked up at him, and his heart squeezed with hope and longing. I know I was coming out here to marry Andrew, but I realized the moment I met him that he would never have been right for me. I just didn't feel the same way toward him that I do about you. Her words came out in a breathless rush, as though she had been wanting to say them for days. I've missed you so much, Addie, and Nathan has as well. He never calls Miss Raleigh Mama the way he did with you. Jacob pulled Addie a little closer and looked down into her flecked blue eyes, knowing with an unshakable conviction that she was the only woman in the world he wanted. Will you marry me, Addie? I can't offer you a ranch or a grand hotel, but the apothecary has a charming little house next door that comes with it. Would that be enough to make you happy? Because that's all I want, for us to be a family. Addie smiled up at him, and his heart melted at the sight of her dimples. I love you too, Jacob, she said softly. Nothing would make me happier than to become your wife and Nathan's ma. A shadow crossed her eyes, and she held up her damaged hand. Are you sure you don't mind about this? Never. Jacob held her hand and tenderly kissed the back of it. Every part of you is perfect to me, he declared. Are you joining us on the wagon, ma'am? I haven't got all day to wait for folks. The stagecoach driver's voice was loud as he heaved 2 banded trunks onto the roof of the coach and lashed them down with a rope. I'll be leaving in the next 10 minutes, so you'd better say your goodbyes and join us. Pass me your carpet bag, and I'll put it with the rest of the luggage. Jacob and Addie exchanged a glance and chuckled. We're not saying goodbye, Addie called back to the man with a shy smile. She leaned her head against Jacob's chest. If anything, quite the opposite. I'm afraid I won't be coming on the stagecoach after all. Jacob lowered his head just as she looked back up at him and brushed a kiss on her lips. They tasted as sweet as strawberries, and suddenly it felt as though everything in his life made perfect sense. Shall we go and see Miss Raleigh and tell her our good news, and then go and meet with the pastor? Yes, and I can't wait to see Nathan again. The stagecoach driver smiled to himself as he watched the town's new apothecary walk away, arm in arm with the young lady who had been crying a few minutes earlier. He had seen enough mail-order brides arriving and meeting their future husbands to know what true love looked like, and this was true love indeed. Another happy couple, that's what I like to see, Lord. He muttered before breaking into a cheery tune as he clambered onto the seat and picked up the reins to leave Rocky River and head to the next town. Epilogue. Rocky River, 1883. 2 years later. Addie tied the ribbons of her bonnet under her chin and reached into the crib. Are you okay to carry baby Sandra? Jacob's voice was like warm honey behind her, and Addie turned around and stood on her tiptoes to brush a kiss on his lips. I would say yes, but we both know Sandra adores being carried to church by her papa. Her heart overflowed with happiness as she watched Jacob pick up their daughter and drop a kiss on her soft curls. Mama, will you hold my hand while we walk? And can we be right next to Sandra? Nathan came charging into the room toward Addie, almost tripping over his bootlaces. He loved his little sister and puffed out his chest proudly at the thought of helping take her out. How about we tie those boots up first? Addie replied with a chuckle. Now that he was almost 3, Nathan could sometimes feel like a tornado of energy, especially as she had been feeling more tired than usual lately. She checked her reflection in the mirror one last time, noticing the brightness in her blue eyes. She knew the reason why, and figured that today would be a good time to tell Jacob. After church, perhaps, she thought to herself with a secretive smile. A few moments later, they strolled through Rocky River toward the church they attended, just past the park. It was a beautiful early summer's day, with blossom on the trees and flowers nodding in people's front yards. The chiming of the church bells rang out joyously, lifting Addie's heart. "Howdy, Mr. and Mrs. Muswell." "Good morning, Jacob and Addie. Isn't it a wonderful day?" Their progress through town was slow, but for the best of reasons, because now they knew so many people. Folks often stopped to chat. As they got nearer to the church, a wagon drew up next to them. "Addie, how are you? It feels like ages since I saw you." Julia struggled down from her seat at the front of the wagon, awkward because of her swollen belly. "Julia, would you please wait for me to help you down?" Ezra, her husband, rolled his eyes good-naturedly as he jumped down after her to hitch their horse. "I'll slow down once the baby arrives, but until then, I don't need to be treated like a china doll." Julia grinned at her husband to show she meant it kindly, then peeked over the edge of the shawl that Sandra was wrapped in. "Isn't she adorable?" she declared, beaming at Addie and Jacob. "What a sweet little girl, and she's growing so fast I hardly recognize her." "She sure is," Jacob said proudly. "That's my little sister, you know," Nathan added, tugging Julia's hand with solemn eyes. A shadow crossed Julia's face. Addie knew exactly what she was thinking. "You don't need to apologize again for writing those letters to me when I was in New York," she said softly. "Are you sure?" Julia replied. "Andrew and Mary are happily married, as you know, but I still don't quite know what possessed me to place that advertisement and write to you, pretending to be him. I hope the Lord will forgive me." Addie gave her friend a smile. "I can assure you that I forgave you a very long time ago, Julia. It's all in the past, so I'm sure it's time to forgive yourself as well." Jacob shot Addie a look that was full of love. Her generous heart was something he had always admired in her. "If you hadn't placed the advertisement, Addie and I would never have met on the train, and we would never have gotten married. You see? Look how much good came out of what you did," Addie said. "You did it with the best of intentions, so I insist we never need to mention it again. I enjoyed working at the ranch, and I'm glad that your parents are still well enough to enjoy meeting their latest grandbaby when the time comes." Ezra took hold of Julia's hand and tucked it into the crook of his arm. "That's enough reminiscing for now, Julia," he said firmly. "You can rest after church and let me take care of you for once." He tipped his hat as they walked ahead. "You'll come and join us for coffee soon, won't you?" he continued, smiling back at them. "Of course. We'll want to meet your baby." Jacob paused for a moment. It was under the same sycamore tree where he had first declared his love to Addie, a fact which was not lost on her. "I have some news," he said. "I was going to wait until after church, but I figure I may as well tell you now." "This sounds intriguing." Addie lifted her eyebrows, thinking how handsome he looked in his Sunday best. "Dr. Mundy told me yesterday that he wants to take things a bit easier. Now that he's gotten married, he wants to spend a little more time with Felicity. I think that's a great idea. I'm so happy he found love at last. He's asked me to take a bigger role, see some more of his patients. Would that be okay with you?" "Of course. Will it mean traveling away to the further ranches?" Addie kept her voice light, not wanting to sway him either way. She knew how much it meant to Jacob to help those in need. Oh no, he enjoys that part of the job best of all. As Felicity's children are all grown up now, he says she's looking forward to making ranch visits with him. They both like camping out in their wagon. Addie smiled with genuine happiness at how things had changed. "In that case, I'm delighted to see your job expanding. Dr. Mundy is very wise to put his faith in you, Jacob, because you're a wonderful apothecary and a very caring man." Her eyes suddenly misted over with tears. "What's wrong? Are you sure you're not upset about the job?" "No, I just can't believe how blessed we are. All my life, I longed to have a family of my own, and everything I hoped for has come true. If Sister Mary could see me now." She sighed happily. "She used to say, 'Trust in the Lord's plan, Adeline.' By his grace, things will work out, you'll see. She sounds like a very wise woman, Jacob said. He shifted baby Sandra in his arms and smiled as Nathan bent down to pick a flower to tuck in her shawl. God has blessed us with 2 wonderful children. Actually, I have some news of my own, too, Addie said quickly. She linked arms with Jacob as they started walking toward the church again. I have a feeling our blessings are going to be multiplying sometime before Christmas, she added with a mischievous grin. Are you saying what I think you are? Jacob stopped to face her with a wide smile of joy. We always said we wanted a big family, didn't we? Addie's heart filled with love as she saw how delighted Jacob looked at her news. Nathan skipped ahead, and Sandra dozed contentedly. Soon they would be joined by another baby. Life is good, she thought to herself, with Jacob's comforting presence by her side. She felt like the happiest woman alive as the church bells summoned them to give praise to the Lord. The same Lord who had heard her prayers and hopes all those years ago, and by his grace brought her and Jacob together. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler, with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.